Simulate the universe, starting with speed through Greece. Chapter 26. After all, it's troublesome to step over ants without crushing them. What was the fate of Jason, the captain of the legendary hero ship, Argo, who received the blessings and protection of the gods? Therefore, among the three ways to become stronger, he felt that divine blessings were the least reliable. Yet, the power Hector mentioned, which he was most likely to encounter first, was the one he disliked the most. Of course, since it's just in the simulated universe, there seems to be no problem trying out divine blessings. Even if he dies, he can just restart. He wondered if the blessings of the gods could be inherited in the outside world. And putting aside this potentially useless and troublesome thing for now. The last one. Powerful weapons. Yi knew quite a few. But almost every one of them had a destined owner, or had already fallen into the hands of various heroes. He had no chance with ownerless ones, either their location was too far, or the time and world were wrong. He couldn't win against those with owners. This was truly a dead end. Could he really only rely on Hector to guide him? Although it was just the simulated universe, Hector's sincere guidance over the past few days made Yi unable to bring himself to exploit him. Although he really wanted the template of the demigod Achilles, so that he could quickly become strong in reality. He didn't want to become someone enslaved by power. Yi had his own principles for how he conducted himself. His moral compass would not allow him to do such a thing. For someone who had helped him, not to repay them, but to turn around and cause their death, that would be too disgusting. I have a bad feeling, Hector. We'll reach Thebes tomorrow. You can guess which enemy we might encounter. If the Greek allied forces truly intend to attack the surrounding cities, who would be the hero responsible for conquering the city dedicated to the chief god Apollo? Yi asked. Hector's expression also became serious after hearing this. He frowned slightly, deep in thought. Are you trying to say that the demigod Achilles might appear on this battlefield? No wonder you are so eager to gain power. But there's no need to worry too much. If we truly encounter that fellow, I will be responsible for intercepting him. I swear by the shield in my hand. Before I fall, I will never let my brother die in battle first. Hector's words were firm, and he was also very confident in his own strength. Before a direct confrontation with that demigod, Hector didn't feel that he would definitely lose. Although he wasn't so arrogant as to be certain he could defeat that great demigod hero. He was confident enough to merely hold him off and escape with his father-in-law and others. Who isn't the first warrior of the allied forces? Yi was also somewhat moved at this moment. He would absolutely not let him die in battle first. This great hero of Troy considered him his brother. Yi, there's no need for that. It's not shameful to run if you can't win. If I encounter danger, there's no need to save me either. That would probably be my destiny. What nonsense are you speaking? I haven't even seen the day you become a hero yet. If I am Troy's past, then you are Troy's future. How can the future perish before the past? Hector did not agree with Yi's words, instead showing an angry expression. With his personality, once he determined someone was his brother, he would absolutely never abandon them. For this man of deep affection, just as he cherished his wife and protected his brother Paris. When those around him faced danger, this beast would awaken, bearing its fiercest fangs at the enemy. For him to abandon his brothers and friends, to avoid battle, that would be an insult to him. Seemingly truly angry, Hector kept a cold face afterward, and the topic ended on a sour note. Yi was also stunned by Hector's attitude. After a long time, he somewhat understood and comprehended the beliefs of this genuine man, yet he fell into silence. Recalling the evening glow that stained everything in the forest, and the scene of him sparring with Hector. This prince of Troy never showed arrogance in front of him, despite his status. If Yi, who only wanted to gain power but wasn't fixated on becoming a hero, was like an anomaly in this era, then this deeply affectionate prince was also like an anomaly in ancient Greece, an era where hero was often synonymous with brigand, like Paris. They were indeed kindred spirits. Yi did not correct Hector, he had said something wrong. He was not Troy's future. Troy, for Yi, was ultimately just a dream. And when a person cannot even solve the problems of food, clothing, and shelter, they won't talk grandly about heroic dreams. Not to mention, few who become heroes have good endings. In the simulated universe, even in war, he at least had Hector as a strong backing. But in reality, he hadn't escaped danger yet and was still in a dungeon in some unknown world. When the dream ended, he would eventually have to face reality. Finally, the two, who had a heart-to-heart talk under the moonlight but parted on bad terms. When Hector returned with a cold face, the accompanying soldiers also dared not laugh loudly. Although they didn't know what had happened, they could sense that the atmosphere was starting to change. They had thought such a tense atmosphere would continue. The next morning, just as the few of them extinguished the campfire and prepared to continue their journey, Hector suddenly threw a weapon to Yi. Because it was thrown directly upright, it wasn't dangerous. Yi instinctively reached out and gripped the shaft. Upon closer inspection, it was a long spear emitting a faint golden light with ancient inscribed patterns. The cold radiance it exuded seemed to freeze one's spine. Just by holding it, an invisible force seemed to flow into his body. And at this moment, the light glinting from the spearhead under the sun gave it a sense of divinity. If he had to describe it, it was divinity. This is. He immediately realized the unusual nature of this spear. And after careful observation, a strong sense of familiarity arose in Yi's heart. Isn't this the weapon and armament Hector has always used? Yes. It was indeed Hector's spear. He had seen Hector use it during battles on the battlefield before. Hector's figure, fighting on the battlefield with the golden spear, was dazzling and powerful and inspiring, something to aspire to. To aspire to gain such unparalleled power on the battlefield. And the material of this spear was not simple. When Hector demonstrated his throwing technique earlier, it shattered so many large trees and created an airwave that directly plowed the ground, yet it suffered no damage at all. If it were an ordinary weapon, even the hardest synthetic metal forged with modern technology, it would be impossible for it to remain unchanged, without the slightest damage, after such a brilliant and powerful strike. Hector, it's for you. If you don't want me to save you, then just try to survive on your own strength. Until you find a suitable weapon for yourself, use this for now. A powerful warrior cannot be without a good weapon. This weapon is forged from divine iron and crescent iron. It possesses an indomitable power, capable of easily destroying city walls and gates. Its attack power is extremely strong, and it cannot be controlled by ordinary people. You can hold it, but that doesn't mean you can wield it. When you can fully unleash the power within the God Spear, it can be a one-shot kill, penetrating any enemy's armor. As for its name, it has never been given one since its forging. If you want to name it, why not call it Hector's Spear? Knight's heart trembled, and he said with immense surprise, God Spear, Hector. Are you crazy? You actually gave your weapon to me. What about you? At this moment, hearing Hector's words, information about this weapon also appeared in Knight's mind. This spear is not as simple as Hector said. Although Hector described its power very accurately, it is not some nameless spear. Or rather, the spear is famous because of its wielder. Tracing back to ancient myths, the Iliad records 10 great god spears. And what weapons are on par with Hector's god spear? Such as the god spear of Calvus, which was the weapon of Hercules' son. The other god spear wielders were mostly sons of gods or sons of titans. All of them were demigods or descendants of titans. And in a certain game worldview, a parallel universe, it is a noble phantasm, with the beautiful name of indestructible holy spear, sharing the name with Durandana, and it is even the prototype of Durandal, one of the future 3 holy swords. Of course, there are also legends that Durandal was originally Hector's sword. At this moment, Hector patted the long sword at his waist in front of Knight and said indifferently, "This is enough for me. Although it's not as handy as a long spear on the battlefield, as a commander stationed in the rear, I won't encounter too many enemies." Having this Durandana, made of the same material as the god spear, is already enough. Durandal. Durandal. The indestructible blade, the everlasting sword. This sword actually exists. And Knight looked closely. The material and appearance of that sword were indeed forged as if from the same system as the god spear in his hand. It was equally sacred and of excellent quality. For a moment, Knight's emotions became complicated. He was both shaken by witnessing the legendary god spear and holy sword, and moved by Hector's gift. At this moment, Knight held the god spear in his hand, feeling incredibly heavy. If I said I wasn't interested in the god spear, that would definitely be a lie. But he couldn't understand why Hector was so good to him, even giving away such a god spear, saying it was for him to use temporarily until he found his own weapon. But wasn't he worried that he would just take it and not return it? What was the difference between this and just giving it away? Don't rush to refuse, I believe in your character. At the same time, it is also a respect for your honor as a warrior. Since you don't want to cry and ask me to save you, then live on your own strength, and then reach the peak. In this process, let this god spear named after me accompany you. Compared to me, you need a good weapon more right now to achieve greater growth, right? Hector said. He couldn't help Knight bathe in dragon blood, and divine blessings required Knight himself to gain the favor of the gods. And if Hector could do anything as a friend, it was only this one thing. This is the only gift I can give you. The god spear. Hector finally had a name. However, when talking about the god spear being named after himself, Hector, this generous and sincere hero, for the first time, blushed and felt a bit shy. He had just thought of it and then blurted it out. Although he sounded open-minded and calm when he said it, the thought of naming a weapon after himself brought a sense of shame to his heart. But now that it was said, it was like spilled water, it couldn't be taken back. Forget it. Compared to such an insignificant matter, Hector recalled what happened last night. Afterward, he thought for a long time and finally understood some things. Only then did he make this decision. After understanding his friend's pride, he seemed to no longer be so angry, but rather relieved. Heroes all have their own pride and sense of honor. Perhaps when encountering danger, the other party truly didn't want him to save them. That's right, it must have been out of a hero's sense of honor that he refused his rescue. Let alone Knight. If he were in that situation, Hector probably wouldn't want Knight to save him either. As Troy's undefeated god of war, he was very confident in his own strength. If he were to be defeated and beheaded in a sacred duel with other heroes, he would not fear the arrival of death in the slightest, he would only feel regret and unwillingness. His honor did not allow him to retreat, and it also made him understand Knight. Knight, what did you imagine all night? However, understanding is one thing, but as a friend, he should still do something. Since that was the case, Hector, determined to help Knight, thought of the various methods he had previously told Knight about for temporarily increasing strength. Among them, only providing him with a powerful weapon was what Hector could do at the moment. And Hector had quite a few good things on him. In addition to the god spear and the holy sword, the armor on his body and the shield in his hand were also forged from divine steel. Although they couldn't compare to the former two and couldn't directly provide power, they could increase defensive power. Ordinary soldiers' swords and knives could not penetrate them. It was like a simplified version of Achilles' invulnerable body. Even when fighting against the powerful armaments of heroes, they were not inferior. However, comparatively, although the shield and armor were good, they couldn't defend against the true killing moves of those heroes when the difference in inherent power was too great. Just like in the future, Hector almost pierced through all 7 layers of Ajax's shield with one spear. True heroes never play with shields. Hector had considered giving Knight a shield, armor, and the like for self-defense. After considering the cost-effectiveness, it was better to give him more offensive means than defensive, perhaps allowing him to fight to the death. If he were to encounter a hero who was as skilled at armor-piercing as he was, or who possessed an armor-piercing god spear or holy sword, then he would be as good as paper. However, with the power-up from a good weapon, he might be able to severely wound enemies on the battlefield. As long as the enemy was killed, the crisis would be resolved. Offense as defense, there was no more suitable way to survive. And so, this scene unfolded today. Thank you, Hector. Knight finally stopped refusing and expressed his sincere gratitude. Anyway, it was only the simulated universe, and he wouldn't be able to take the god spear with him in the end. But it was a rare opportunity to experience the feeling of having a god spear in hand and the power it granted. The immense power hidden within the spear, even just perceiving the tip of the iceberg, made his heart pound. No wonder in myths, powerful heroes and gods would always seek out and long for a good weapon. The combat power with a divine artifact and without one was simply incomparable. Just by Knight's perception, the power he could now wield through Hector's god spear alone could increase his combat effectiveness by several times. This also gave him more confidence in facing Achilles head-on. With this god spear, he was confident he could at least fight his way to Achilles. As for what to do after confronting Achilles, that could only be left to fate. Although Hector had misunderstood him again, thinking it was about heroic honor, Knight didn't bother to explain this wonderful misunderstanding. However, at least for now, he truly had no great interest in becoming a hero. Putting aside the current crisis and the impending crisis in the simulated universe, if he had to say, what was his dream? Hector. All right, there's no time to lose. We must reach Thebes today. Let's go. You embark on your journey anew. Armed with Hector's god spear, like exchanging a bird gun for a cannon, you are no longer so afraid of the brutal battle that may soon arrive. At this moment, an uneasy premonition inexplicably arose in Hector's heart. He vaguely felt that something was about to happen. That's why he was so anxious this morning, urging you to hurry on your way. Perhaps it was the powerful sixth sense or intuition of a hero coming true. When you arrived in Thebes, you found the city ablaze with flames, and faint sounds of shouting and killing could be heard. Hector's face changed drastically. We're too late. They had been delayed on the road for a few days, and he had thought the enemy wouldn't react so quickly. He hadn't expected problems to still arise. There was no time to dwell on whose fault it was. Hector immediately reined in his horse, turned, and roared, "Everyone, follow me into the city. If you see Greek soldiers, kill them on sight. Do not get bogged down in combat. The primary objective is to protect the civilians. Retreat." This was not justice. The essence of so-called war and slaughter was life and death. If you didn't want to die, you had to shout louder. Anger could dispel fear. Hector made a decisive move, immediately preparing to lead his troops into the city. As for the option of turning and fleeing, he hadn't even considered it. Absolutely no retreat. They had come all this way. If Thebes was breached, then all previous plans would become meaningless. And in Greece, a world where individualistic heroes flourished, a hero's personal strength was powerful enough to influence the course of a battle. At this moment, Hector intended to use himself as a spear, leading the soldiers behind him to carve a bloody path out of the Greek soldiers' encirclement. He would consolidate the last remaining forces in the city, then lead some of the civilians to escape and return to Troy. There was no time for hesitation. And out of strong trust in Hector, the soldiers fearlessly followed him, galloping into the city through the broken city gates, which seemed to have been breached by the enemy. As soon as they entered the city, the sight that greeted Knight's eyes was one of utter chaos. Everywhere was slaughter, the slaughter between Greek soldiers and the soldiers within Thebes, and the slaughter of civilians by Greek soldiers. It was a desperate struggle, a final resistance with no power to fight back. Everywhere was a scene of madness. The temperature of blood continued to rise. We can't hold them. We can't hold them at all anymore. There wasn't even time to send for reinforcements from Troy. On the streets of Thebes at this moment, among the small groups of soldiers making their last desperate stand, a squad leader couldn't help but murmur, feeling despair in his heart. Amidst the flames of war, ordinary people who were ceaselessly praying were being massacred. The soldiers who were supposed to protect them were now barely able to protect themselves. With the massive influx of Greeks, they were like a small boat on the ocean, constantly at risk of being swallowed. Of course, no one really cared what would happen here next. This temporary resistance on the battlefield would have no impact on the overall outcome of victory or defeat. The great hero Achilles had personally led his team, charging towards the very center of the city, intending to capture or slaughter the highest leaders there. And fueled by the rage of 3 failed attempts to conquer Troy, the Greeks had been holding back their anger, and now it was all being unleashed on these surrounding cities. They had come for revenge. The ferocity they displayed when they mistakenly landed on the wrong island and killed friendly forces would not change on the day Troy fell. Now, all that ferocity was being unleashed on the small city of Thebes. And under the momentum of this great force, the fate of the important figures in the city was predictable. Death was more likely than capture. That was where the battle was most intense. What remained here, on the outermost edge of the city, were merely the corpses of the defeated and the victors, like vultures, feasting on carrion. Certain death. Inevitable defeat. Resistance was nothing more than meaningless self-satisfaction. Salvation was nowhere to be found. What was unfolding now was a grotesque farce that had already surpassed the abyss of despair. At this moment, a group of Theban remnants huddled together. Soldier after soldier spoke. Even if we die, we must take a piece of flesh from the Greeks. If Lord Hector were here, how could these barbaric Greeks be so rampant? I don't want to die. Sob, sob. What cowardly talk. At a time like this, no matter how much you try to escape, it's useless. The weapons in the enemy's hands won't be put down just because they hear your wails. This heart is still beating. This hand still holds a sword. As long as there are enemies, we must continue to fight. Boom tilde. As the last soldier's roar faded, an incendiary bomb landed at his feet, instantly blowing him to smithereens. Amidst countless cries of pain and wails, most of the surviving soldiers were also wounded and maimed. Someone stared wide-eyed in fear, losing their voice. When did this happen? Could it have been thrown in by the Greeks during the siege before? Why is it only exploding now? And just then, because the explosion had blown open the cover. Everyone was exposed to the open air, completely visible. Enemy spotted tilde. They're all hiding here. Everyone, come quickly. The ecstatic voice of a Greek soldier came. These are all living military merits, heads. And this scene made the remaining Thebes soldiers even more desperate. Surrounded by enemies, and all wounded, with less than 2 or 3/10 of their combat power remaining, it was over, it was completely over. They couldn't muster any will to resist. In the face of an absolute power disparity, perhaps the last shred of their resolve to bravely face death was obliterated by that cannonball. Now, they could only pray to the gods, praying to Apollo, the guardian deity of this city, the god of light and music. O God, great God of light, Apollo. Please bring us hope to live. Anything, even if it's just one thing, give us something to rely on in this hell. Even madness, at this point, is no different from a blessing. Ha 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 tilde. Since you're praying to gods, don't you know that Achilles has the blood of the great god King Zeus flowing in him? At this moment, Greek soldiers, who had somehow surrounded them, heard the desperate prayers and burst into mocking laughter. The gods don't have time to descend for you dirty, lowly wild dogs, and even if they did, they would surely stand with us Greeks. One must know that Greece was the center where the light of all gods shone. It was the land favored by the gods in heaven. As the Greeks raised their swords and shields, even as they mocked, they cautiously blocked all escape routes, holding a shield forward to guard against any desperate counterattack from the enemy. Their other hand held a sword, ready to strike and kill after the shield had defended. This impenetrable forest of swords drew closer and closer. As the cold, white gleam reflecting off the sword tips grew nearer, the Thebes soldiers finally realized that praying to the gods was useless. The gods had not responded to them. Closer. Tilde tilde tilde. As one soldier, with a cruel, cold gaze, raised his sword and prepared to strike down a Thebes soldier. Honor and loyalty, these things are not even worth feeding to dogs now. At least in this current situation, there is nothing cheaper than human lives. At this moment, Knight, who had witnessed this scene from afar and was following Hector into the city, felt a great shock in his heart. This was the truth. Also, because of the human purgatory before him, the red ruins and sea of fire everywhere, Knight gripped his weapon tightly, feeling it necessary to do something. Hector looked back at Knight. And after their eyes met, a silent understanding, as if both had instantly made a decision, to save people. Knight took down his bow and drew it while on horseback. The next moment, an arrow, like a broken bamboo, pierced through the air with a resounding hum and shot into the distance. Bang! An arrow like a comet, pierced through the Greek soldier who was raising his sword to strike. What? There's still an enemy. Be careful. Bang tilde. When the Greek soldier's body fell limply, his face still bore the ferocious expression of the previous moment, his eyes wide, completely unaware of what had just happened. But the Greeks who witnessed this startling change immediately became alarmed. Soon, a rush of hooves sounded. When Knight and Hector led the cavalry in, with a hero and a hero candidate, two super warriors with strength far exceeding mortals, joining the battlefield quickly turned into a one-sided slaughter, a massacre of crying and screaming. Are we saved? At this moment, the remaining Thebes soldiers, especially the one who had been so desperate that he believed death was certain, looked at their saviors. The first thing that caught their eyes was the violent aesthetic of Hector and Knight's combat on the battlefield. For a moment, their two figures, bathed in enemy blood, dancing on the battlefield, firmly captivated the soldiers' awestruck gazes. With God's spear Hector in hand, facing only a group of ordinary soldiers, Knight's slaughter efficiency was not inferior to Hector's in the slightest. Especially with the ancient and sacred appearance of the golden god spear, Knight's figure, drenched in blood on the battlefield, truly resembled the revival of an epic hero from ancient times. Bang tilde. He channeled the power within God's spear, piercing two Greek soldiers with one spear, then forcefully pulling and pushing their bodies off himself, off the string of the long spear. The Greek soldiers' bodies fell heavily to the ground. At that instant, Knight's eyes, exposed outside his helmet, were so sharp and cold that one dared not meet his gaze. The Greek soldiers in this area were completely wiped out by Knight and his companions in a short time, without even giving the remaining Thebes soldiers a chance to react or help. At this moment, are there only this few people left? Knight, covered in blood, walked up to the remaining soldiers and asked instinctively. At this moment, he had no idea how terrifying or ferocious he looked. But it was probably just like the feelings of these soldiers when they prayed earlier. On this battlefield, madness was already a blessing. Especially seeing this bloody, brutal scene, which displayed immense power and a sense of security, the Thebes soldiers' eyes showed no fear. Instead, it was as if they had witnessed the descent of their god of war. Replying, "Sir, we are soldiers who were originally guarding the West District and didn't have time to retreat. The demigod Achilles has already led the main Greek army into the city. The remaining people should all be fighting there. Are you the legendary Hector?" The rescued soldier spoke excitedly. Did they have reinforcements? That shining golden god spear in the red hell, it couldn't be wrong. Anyone who had seen it once would never mistake it again. It was the faith of the Trojans, the weapon of the man they considered Greece's strongest hero. If the man before them wasn't Hector, then who could he be? Although his face was stained with blood, making his features unclear, this power already revealed his identity. However, as the soldiers looked at Knight with fervent, adoring gazes, as if he were their savior, in this purgatory, their prayers went unanswered by the gods, but their beloved hero, their guardian hero, had descended. Intel. Hector rode up. How is it? Did you get any useful information? Knight. Hector. Although also covered in blood, Hector, skilled in martial arts, had not allowed himself to become too disheveled. As soon as he approached, a soldier who recognized his familiar face exclaimed. Had they mistaken him just now? Immediately, everyone awkwardly and dumbfoundedly fell silent. Not only the soldier who had just spoken, but they had all mistaken him, which was why they hadn't stopped the absurd misidentification earlier. After Knight briefly explained the situation, Hector immediately stated that he would lead this remnant force, and the two would act separately, gathering the remaining soldiers and fighting their way to the city center. With their current military strength, it was impossible to defeat Achilles, who had the powerful Greek army. Hector. This is truly a losing game. Even this strongest hero of Troy had only solemnity in his heart at this moment. He hadn't expected the one leading the team to actually be Achilles. He had observed him from afar. Although Hector was confident that his strength was second to none, he truly did not want to meet this man before finding a way to solve Achilles' invulnerable body. Once he fell into a prolonged battle, unable to break through for a long time, he might lose. But there was no time to think about such problems anymore. Having come this far, he would never retreat. The day before departing from Troy, Hector, who told his beloved wife everything, had already explained the main purpose of this operation, to rescue his father-in-law and his wife's siblings. He had promised his worried, tearful wife that he would bring his father-in-law and the others back safely. Neither a man's promise nor a hero's honor and courage would ever allow him to retreat without a fight. Yi said solemnly, "Understood. But, don't die, Hector." An indescribable heaviness rose in Yi's heart. It had still come to this. He hoped Hector wouldn't encounter Achilles first. Hector might be destined to fall at Achilles' hands. But it absolutely shouldn't be, because he changed the mythical history, leading to his premature death. He had to find Achilles first, lure him away, and buy Hector time to withdraw. If it were just his past self, Yi wouldn't have confidence. But with the god spear in hand, perhaps he still had a chance. What the hell? Even with the god spear, the spear in Achilles' hand was also no ordinary item. It was a product of Hephaestus, the god of forging and fire, including his armor and shield. And the weapons of Zeus and other main gods, such as the thunder spear that wielded the world's lightning, and the ocean trident that controlled the oceans, were all from the same maker. No matter how he thought about it, they wouldn't be worse than the equipment on Hector, and might even be stronger. Facing Achilles head-on, he still had no chance of winning, without a doubt. Of course, what he had to do was not to directly confront Achilles. The incident where the Thebes soldiers mistook him for Hector had given Yi an idea. Holding the god spear, Hector. Plus, having already understood Hector's spearmanship, for those unfamiliar with Hector, perhaps he could impersonate him convincingly for a short period. Thus, a bold and crazy idea was born in Yi's mind. It could be seen from Hector that in this era, from the heroes down to ordinary people, almost no one did not pursue glory. They fought for their respective honor and dignity, fearless even of death. More than death, they worried about meaningless death, a worthless sacrifice. If it were in the name of a duel, even that demigod would inevitably fall for it. As two of the strongest heroes of their era, contending for the title of the strongest Greek hero, one of them was bound to die. The victor would take all, stepping on the loser's corpse and honor to reach the pinnacle. The loser would lose everything. Forgotten by the world, even the gods who once praised his bravery would no longer remember his former glory. With the arrogance, or pride, of Greek heroes, they would absolutely not allow themselves to choose to flee in a duel. The plan is feasible. A crazy tactic, but for this crazy battlefield, it seemed incredibly fitting. So, while leading the remaining soldiers forward, Yi suddenly turned his horse and said, "From now on, I am Hector. Did you remember that?" In the firelight of the hellish battlefield, the man holding the god spear rode his horse, declaring coldly, forcefully, and dominantly. This was not a discussion, but an order. It was a declaration. No refusal allowed. Yi had no time to explain to them. Every second counted on the battlefield. All he wanted was for the soldiers to believe that he was Hector. And in such a time, dominance was more appropriate than benevolence. When Yi turned his head, his oppressive gaze fixed on the few people. Yi, who was completely unaware that his vitality was now countless times greater than that of ordinary people. Did not know how intense the aura of having slain many Greeks was at this moment. The moment he turned his head, all the remaining soldiers gathered behind him trembled all over. As if in a trance, the figure before them truly merged with that great hero of ancient Greece. That first warrior of Troy in their hearts. The astonishing aura that erupted from him in an instant in his blood-stained face actually caused no resistance to rise in the soldiers' hearts. Their bodies were very honestly subdued. Soldiers. Ye. Any problems? Soldiers. No. Since Lord Hector wants you to lead us, we will completely trust you. Whatever you say, it is. In their eyes, whether it was Hector or Ye before them, they were both legendary heroes. This was a genuine respect and submission born from personally witnessing their mighty strength and prowess when slaying enemies on the battlefield. Ye. Very good, from now on you will address me as Lord Hector. And introduce me as such to any remaining soldiers you gather later. After speaking, Yi gave a few more instructions, then spurred his horse forward again. He went ahead, encountering and rescuing Thebes' remnants or ordinary citizens fighting the Greeks along the way. For a time, the figure riding a horse with a golden spear, galloping through the sea of fire. That scene remained etched in the hearts of many who survived that battlefield, even years later. Like a shining meteor, a fleeting figure, bringing the dawn of salvation to countless weeping and praying people in hell. Who is that Lord? Among the fleeing refugees of Thebes, a beautiful maiden, almost violated by the Greeks, as beautiful as the moon goddess Artemis, couldn't help but speak. At the critical moment when she was grabbed by the arm by the enemy and about to be pulled back. It was Yi, holding the god spear, who charged like a crashing star, blazing a bloody path. Finally, after leaving a message for them to wait there for his soldiers to come for rescue, he continued to rush to the next battlefield. From experiencing despair to the blossoming of hope. Watching the departing figure. Her terrified emotions seemed to calm down, carrying a hint of inexplicable longing, deeply imprinted in the girl's eyes. And later, from the Thebes soldiers who arrived afterwards. Those rescued by Yi earlier. The girl and countless grateful people learned the name of that hero, Hector. But, impossible, although that spear is indeed Lord Hector's spear. But, the girl spoke with shock and astonishment, she had seen Hector. That prince of Troy, did not look like this. Yet, why would these soldiers lie? Seeing that there was someone here who knew the truth, the soldiers hesitated. The surrounding civilians had also heard what the girl said just now, and for a moment, they couldn't help but look at the Thebes soldiers. Many people knew the girl's identity. Although she was mingling with them, the common people, that one was the high priest's daughter. She was also the witch who would sacrifice to the gods in the future. She wouldn't possibly deceive everyone. And after knowing the girl's identity, the soldiers were also in a difficult position. They could only claim that it was the hero's order to call him Hero Hector. As for why this identity was fabricated, they weren't clear. So that's how it is. Since it's the hero's command, then we will follow the hero's wishes. The hero must have a profound meaning in doing so. Since it was what he wanted, even for the sake of his life-saving grace, they would never expose the hero's disguise. Everyone, we were saved by Hero Hector. Do you understand? Yes, yes, Hero Hector saved us. A group of people nodded frantically. They all reacted immediately. Of course. In ancient Greece, people loved to spread the stories of heroes the most. They could still restrain themselves now, but after safely leaving the battlefield, it was uncertain whether they would still remember their current promise. The human characteristic of having a big mouth would not easily disappear. Fortunately, the disguise Knight needed was only temporary. That's enough. When he had basically cleared out the enemies on the path forward, the last wave of soldiers, who had been rescued and were gradually catching up, converged. After this sweep, he even managed to gather an army of 70 men. And many of the remaining soldiers who were still arriving later, once all assembled, the number could probably double. If it was the same on Hector's side, When they converged, adding the people they brought from Troy, forming a 500-man team would not be a problem. But, Knight noticed the intense sounds of shouting and killing in the city center. Knight, there's no more time to wait. I must go to the center of the battlefield to rescue them now. If anyone feels fear, stay here to protect the civilians and wait to rendezvous with reinforcements. The enemy is the invulnerable demigod Achilles. Your swords and knives will not harm him at all, even if you don't dodge. If you retreat now, I will not mock your cowardice. Humans don't need to face insurmountable monsters. But what about you, hero? Thinking of the demigod Achilles, who had shattered the city gate with a single spear and led the enemy army to conquer Thebes overnight, the soldiers were terrified to their core. But a soldier swallowed his saliva, still forcing down the fear in his heart, gripping his weapon, and anxiously asking the nameless hero in front of him. Everyone knew he was not the real Hector. They didn't even know the name of this hero at all. Humans don't need to face insurmountable monsters. But what about this nameless hero himself? Even though the power Knight displayed during the rescue had already subdued them, the soldiers who had personally witnessed Achilles' terror had no confidence at all that the hero could defeat that demigod. Some who had been saved by him and deeply cherished his kindness even wanted to shout loudly at this moment, "You don't need to face that kind of monster that humans cannot defeat either. Monsters can only be dealt with by beings who are also monsters. Or rather, gods. Other demigod heroes. And it was in this hell of firelight, looking at the reflected faces full of worry and shining eyes, that Knight fell silent. At this moment, a subtle touch arose in his heart. He had never thought that perhaps he had only done something insignificant, something within his power, saving some innocent civilians and remnants of soldiers on the battlefield as much as possible, and he would receive so many people's genuine, worried hearts. Just a day ago, they were complete strangers. No one needs to feel worried or pained for the sacrifice of a non-existent person. He had long chosen his own way of ending. Even when facing a monster that humans cannot defeat, even if the cost is death. However, there's no need to fear like others, like the people of this era. For Knight, death was merely the end of a simulated universe test. It was a new beginning, not a gamble of his entire life. But Knight couldn't tell them these things. He needed to find a way that people of this era could better understand. After a moment of thought, if Hector were in this situation, what would he say? Finally, Knight's hoarse voice slowly spoke. Honor your God, love your woman, and defend your homeland. This is a truth a friend of mine taught me. As long as the flames of war on this land have not ended, then the steps of battle cannot stop. Someone always has to face that kind of monster. Here, besides me, no one else is qualified. If you believe me, then pray for me. Boom! As Knight's words fell, it was as if they exploded in people's hearts. Everyone looked up, unable to help but gaze at Knight's face, as if wanting to remember this heroic figure. As for the friend's words, people simply took it as making up a friend, completely assuming it was Knight's own thoughts. That short sentence revealed an incredibly vivid personality. A towering image of someone who deeply loved his country, his beloved, and was equally loyal to his God, was thus imprinted in people's minds. And at this moment, 1,000 words were stuck in their hearts, making people's emotions fluctuate. In the end, they could only feel that only one word could describe this feeling: responsibility. That will to protect others, people felt it. You are, in this era, the one and only true hero. Unbeknownst to them, among the refugees who had arrived, protected by a group of soldiers, the girl who had been rescued earlier had just witnessed the scene. She was shaken to her core and captivated by that soul. In ancient Greece, all heroes fought for fame, women, and wealth. Those were their reasons for fighting. Heroes who disrespected the gods, cared only about themselves, and were selfish, were nothing more than bandits with a few good names and monstrous strength that mortals could never achieve. But no one had ever said such words, let alone to heroes who changed women like clothes, held orgies in every country they visited, and even put on public displays. Although they loved the beauty of women, they would never truly care about a woman's inner self. To be the wife of this man must be a very enviable existence. At this moment, the girl felt a little envious of the woman knight mentioned in the second sentence, the one to be loved. Compared to respecting the gods and loving one's homeland, women's focus can sometimes be so particular. May the God of Light's radiance guide your path forward. Bring forth the dawn of victory. The girl suddenly stepped out from the crowd, knelt down, and prayed devoutly for him. Whoosh! In an instant, countless citizens and soldiers, whose hearts had already been touched, saw this and also knelt down, spontaneously praying for Yi. They chanted in unison, "May the God of Light's radiance guide your path forward. Bring forth the dawn of victory." The next moment, a miracle occurred. In the darkness, a sliver of light truly seemed to flash across the sky, instantly illuminating the entire city of Thebes as if it were daytime. Yi. When the white light faded, darkness descended once more, as if everything that had happened in that instant was just an illusion. But Yi quickly realized that it was not an illusion. Under the pure and sincere prayer of the god's priestess candidate, you have received the gaze of the god of light, Apollo. The chief god Apollo projected a portion of his gaze into the mortal realm. With divine power and time image retrospection, Apollo quickly understood and witnessed everything you experienced from Troy all the way to the city of Thebes. The chief god couldn't help but lament that even from a despicable nation, a truly noble flower could be born. Because you saved Apollo's priestess, Apollo's attitude towards you subtly changed. He no longer hated you as much as he hated other Trojans. Instead, a hint of goodwill emerged. The god of light bestowed his blessing of the gods, responding to the prayers of his followers. And it was precisely that blessing from the god of light, whose purpose was unknown, that. Indeed, Yi could sense this blessing, he understood it clearly, but not its function. He could only vaguely perceive a very pure light, a power of light, appearing within his body. He was targeted by a god so quickly. If this followed the beginning of many heroes' stories in Greece, he might from this point embark on the irreversible path of a hero, until the end of that hero's path, witnessing countless irreparable tragedies, until death. Of course, there were also heroes whose lives were complete, but the probability was simply too small. Embarking on the path of a hero was like having a debuff applied. If he had truly transmigrated to the mythical Greece in reality, being targeted by a god, it would be hard to say whether it was fortunate or unfortunate. But since it was the simulated universe, it wasn't such a big problem. As long as he didn't seek death, he could go all out. Although he had a momentary lapse of composure due to the recent incident, Yi had already adjusted. He would consider it an unexpected pleasant surprise, for now. Just as he was about to leave, Hector and Achilles, who had also witnessed the white light, simultaneously looked up in shock from within the small city of Thebes. What was that? X2. To make the night shine like day in an instant, such immense power and unusual phenomenon, besides the sun god, probably only occurred when the god of light, Apollo, descended. And then, considering who the patron god of this city was. Achilles. This has gone too far. Could this war directly cause the chief god Apollo to become enraged and descend to deal with him? They were distant relatives, after all. It wouldn't come to that, would it? Achilles, who was originally full of vigor, wanting to display his bravery through this battle and hang all the enemies' heads high, especially the most distinguished ones like city lords and high priests, they absolutely couldn't be spared. Upon seeing this scene, he immediately reined himself in considerably. After a moment of hesitation, he immediately decided to try not to kill captives and send them to Agamemnon instead. Even if Apollo was angry and wanted to cause trouble, he would go to Agamemnon, and the rest would not concern him. Anyway, he wasn't a bloodthirsty person, it was Agamemnon who had ordered the slaughter of cities around Troy before, and he was just following orders. He was not going to deal with this mess anymore. Compared to displaying his military prowess with enemy heads, he preferred to duel famous, true heroes on the battlefield and fight with all his might. Honestly, Leaving the main battlefield to come to this small city and bully ordinary people, Achilles even found it a bit disappointing and boring. No one here was worth his full effort. Hector. What a troubled time. Meanwhile, on the other side, just as Achilles could think that it was Apollo's divine miracle, Hector naturally could too. He was a little worried in his heart. Had the Greeks already done something irreversible that angered the gods? But now was not the time to think so much. First, repel the enemy. Hector sped up his actions, but due to the drag of most of the remaining infantry, their marching speed was more or less affected. Unlike Yi on the other side, who had completely given up on waiting for the soldiers who were still quite far away. Yi even wanted to madly attract Achilles' attention by himself. If the soldiers were truly afraid, not daring to advance, and all chose to stay put, then he might truly become a lone wolf. However, after experiencing the miraculous scene just now, not only the heroes, but also the common people noticed this miracle. Lord Apollo, the god of light, had actually responded. Suddenly, the title of God-chosen hero, a person noticed and blessed by a god, was instantly imprinted in people's minds, placed upon Yi's head. At this moment, the soldiers' gazes towards Yi were no longer normal. Their eyes became incredibly fervent. Their dazed expressions were as if they were looking at a new legend rising. We can't let him go alone, that would be too lonely. With this thought in mind, 120,320,748. Lord, please take me with you. If someone always has to step forward, that person can be me too. Me too. Lord, take me, take me. Anyway, I was supposed to die. My life was fortunately saved because of you. Let me return this life to you here. I also want to protect my homeland, protect the women from being defiled by the enemy. This is not an obligation you should bear alone. If there's fighting, take me with you too. The soldiers' eyes began to burn with intense fighting spirit and flames. Their courage was ignited. At this moment, a sense of responsibility overcame his fear. Seeing this, Knight did not refuse. What reason did he have to stop the determination of these warriors who truly loved their homeland and wanted to protect their homes? He then spoke, only the cavalry. If you can't keep up with my speed, then honestly hide here and wait for rescue. Battle is not about meaningless sacrifice. The demigod Achilles will be dealt with and held back by me personally. And the remaining Greek soldiers will be left to you to deal with. Hearing knights say this, one person taking on the most terrifying enemy, the demigod Achilles. Immediately, the soldiers, who had summoned their courage but whose legs still trembled slightly, breathed a sigh of relief. The next moment, a strong flame of indignation and confidence rose in their hearts. They dared not face a demigod, but ordinary Greek soldiers. Those Greeks were also mortals, just like them, with one nose, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. They weren't 3-headed and 6-armed, so what was there to be afraid of? If they didn't even dare to face this level of threat, then they would truly be ashamed to face this hero. Afterward, a dozen cavalrymen were quickly selected, not even 20 people were gathered. But there was no time to hesitate. After Knight briefly explained his plan of action, it was then that these people understood Knight's bold and crazy plan. Knight told the highest-ranking soldier remaining here that after he lured Achilles away, and after the real Hector arrived, he should have Hector lead the people to flee first. And he would immediately escape back to Troy after getting rid of Achilles. How utterly insane. To lure Achilles away using Hector's identity, and still want to escape from the hands of that powerful demigod. Even to buy time for Hector and the others. Knight couldn't just run away, he had to confront Achilles directly to have a chance to delay him. Isn't this suicide? But the crowd, who had already understood this man's determination, and these cavalrymen, who had already made up their minds to die as well. A dozen people charging into the Greek allied forces surrounding the city center. Even without directly facing Achilles, it was still a situation of certain death. If hope is given to them, then they are destined to witness an equal despair, the hero's demise. Let us witness the tragic demise with our own eyes. Don't be too lonely. Those who were already destined to die, now had their remaining bodies with value for reuse. This, for them, was enough. Trojans or ancient Greeks. Essentially, they all belonged to this era, and their characteristics were very similar. With enough belief and honor, they never feared death to protect their dignity, their homeland, and their families behind them. This was the romance of this era. The romance of this era where heroism flourished. Plan complete. Although he didn't know if this absurd plan would succeed. But, how would one know without trying? As night began to act, countless people prayed for them. Meanwhile, on the battlefield where Achilles and the others were, inside the tallest building in the city, an elder, who was the city's highest administrator, that is, Hector's father-in-law, Aetion, spoke with an incredibly pale expression to the person beside him. We've lost. We've lost. Yes, we lost this war. The city was ravaged, citizens and soldiers died one after another. It will be our turn soon, won't it? My poor 2 daughters are still missing and their fate unknown. If they are captured by the Greeks, I truly cannot imagine their end. The person speaking beside Aetion at this time, with a look of profound grief, was none other than the high priest of Apollo, Chryses. Hearing his old friend's words, Aetion spoke to comfort him, for the sake of Apollo. That demigod will not make trouble for you. Even if Chryses and Briseis' sisters are captured by the Greeks, they will mostly just become captives, there's no need to worry about their lives. Chryses' expression did not improve in the slightest. His old friend's comfort was indeed true. But he also noticed that the other party said their lives would be safe. But it didn't mean his daughter's chastity would also be unharmed. Those barbaric Greeks. If they captured his 2 beautiful daughters, how could they not be tempted? Chryses was very confident in his daughter's beauty. They were no less beautiful than the nymphs in the ocean. Being trained as priestesses to serve a god, their appearance naturally went without saying. And his daughter's goddess-like beauty. Perhaps not comparable to the widely renowned Helen, famous throughout Greece. But certainly not much inferior. In the past, Chryses tried to minimize his daughter's public appearances. Precisely because he didn't want their beauty to be known by too many people and attract disaster. In Greece, beauty was also a sin. Without the power to protect one's beauty, the outcome was often incomparably tragic. Either targeted by that great god king, or targeted by another great lord of the ocean. Even more so, visited by gods and heroes in turns. But no matter how carefully one guarded, it still couldn't stop natural and man-made disasters from descending. This is war. Even those in high positions, once the war falls into a disadvantage, cannot even protect their own families. And if according to the original historical development, after tonight, both of this old father's daughters would be captured, not one left. The eldest daughter was offered to Agamemnon. Agamemnon was amazed that her beauty far surpassed his wife's by several times. The king of Mycenae proposed to her without hesitation but was rejected. Afterward, the old priest Chryses wanted to redeem his daughter with a large ransom, but Agamemnon refused. Chryses prayed to the gods. Apollo, the god of light, upon learning of this, brought a plague upon the human world, inflicting divine punishment upon the Greek allied forces. Only then did Agamemnon reluctantly return Chryses' daughter. However, his younger daughter was very soon targeted by Agamemnon again, but that is a story for later. And for Aetion and Chryses at this moment, the immediate problem was their greatest crisis. Outside, Achilles did not personally act. He was already somewhat tired of this overly lopsided and boring war. The rest could be left to his soldiers. However, that burst of daylight just now still made the demigod somewhat concerned. Why did Apollo descend a divine miracle? Yet nothing happened. If that main god was truly angry because his protected city was destroyed, he wouldn't just show a light and run away, would he? And just as Achilles casually took out an apple he had gotten from an abandoned market stall in Thebes earlier and took a bite, as the apple juice burst in his mouth. At the same time, it was as if a stone had been thrown into a calm lake, and a new turning point suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Enemy. It's the enemy. Enemy reinforcements have arrived, Lord Achilles. They're attacking from behind. A panicked cry came from the soldiers at the very rear. Achilles trembled all over. When he heard that sound, his subconscious thought was, impossible. How could there be reinforcements? Where would reinforcements come from? Troy and the surrounding small cities could barely defend themselves, so they couldn't spare any troops. How many enemies are there? Achilles' expression became serious, and he immediately turned around and asked. Oh one, no, there should be a dozen people. They are led by a warrior holding a golden spear, charging irresistibly. Many of our brothers have died. We can't stop them at all. The soldier spoke nervously. Achilles. A dozen people charging his large army, and they couldn't stop them at all. A hero. Achilles immediately realized that this was a hero from Troy entering the fray. Only heroes far beyond ordinary people could accomplish such an absurd miracle. Suddenly, Achilles was like a roused lion, his eyes sharply opening to reveal a fierce, excited gaze. I've been here so long, has something interesting finally arrived? However, a hero holding a golden spear, who could this be? Subconsciously, a figure flashed through Achilles' mind. It was the warrior he had previously fought against from Troy, the only one he had yearned to fight when he looked across the battlefield. A man like him, with the strongest spear, the strongest shield, and an unparalleled body on the battlefield. They were too similar. No matter what, he had to defeat this man, only then could he prove who was the strongest hero in Greece. Hector. Achilles softly murmured the name of his destined rival. If that person is you, it would be perfect. If not, then I hope it is. I will use your head to display a meteor-like spear to the world. Afterward, Achilles immediately headed in the direction the soldiers had indicated. But when he arrived at the battlefield, he did not see the hero holding the golden spear, nor did he even see a shadow of the so-called enemy. Achilles, where are the enemy troops? Lord Achilles, those people seemed to have come only to rescue some individuals and did not intend to prolong the fight. They left after snatching a group of captives. Achilles. Could there be someone of noble status among those captives? At this moment, a soldier nervously spoke, saying he seemed to have vaguely heard those people shouting that they had found Lord Aetion and priest Chryses. Achilles. No good. Could it be that they had only attacked an empty shell before, and the most noble person in this city had actually already been captured? Achilles did not know who Aetion was. He hadn't inquired about the city's ruler before coming, but the priest's status was not low. For a moment, Achilles thought of something. The priest of the main god Apollo had been rescued. Could this rescue team have been summoned and instructed by Apollo? He bit his lips slightly, hesitating for a moment whether to pursue or not. Oh, I think I heard those soldiers call the leading hero, Hector. A soldier said. The next moment, Achilles immediately and decisively spoke. I will personally pursue them for a while. I'll be back soon. You continue to attack the city center. Regardless of whether the most important person in Thebes had been rescued, Achilles decided to kill two birds with one stone, so he wouldn't miss anything. And his chariot was pulled by a heavenly horse, far surpassing ordinary carriages. If the enemy hadn't gone far, he could catch up quickly by acting alone. Hector. It really is you. When he heard that name, Achilles' warlike will could no longer be contained. Then, without hesitation, Achilles swiftly mounted his chariot. Lord Achilles. Amidst the soldiers' shouts, Achilles left them only a willful and dashing handsome back as he rode away. What should we do? We can only obey Lord Achilles' command and continue to attack the city center. The soldiers looked at each other for a moment, then gritted their teeth and continued to fight. Even if the commander was gone, the remaining scattered and defeated soldiers didn't need Lord Achilles to personally intervene, they could handle it. As for whether Lord Achilles would be injured pursuing the enemy, the soldiers never even considered that possibility. Lord Achilles, with his invulnerable body, great strength, and powerful divine armaments, how could he possibly lose? Even amidst a myriad of troops, that demigod hero could come and go as he pleased. Not to mention it was just a small team of a dozen people who didn't dare to prolong the fight. Meanwhile, in Thebes, on a secluded, deserted path. This was a clear street that Yi had discovered and intentionally had cleared out while sweeping the city and gathering remaining troops before nightfall. He hoped Achilles would fall for the trap and follow him. If everything he had done so far had no effect, there would be no time left. Once Hector arrived, the fated battle between the two would be completely unavoidable. In Thebes, a small city, there were two truly strongest heroes from opposing forces, and one fake hero, yet they had not met. But when Achilles rode his chariot, pulled by the fantastical heavenly horse, into the sky, the neighing of the heavenly horse in the night sky immediately attracted countless gazes. It's Achilles. Hector was leading his soldiers towards the city center when he saw the figure on the chariot. He trembled, his pupils contracting. Had the enemy already discovered them? However, the next moment, to Hector's astonishment, Achilles didn't even glance their way but sped off in another direction. This made Hector's heart clench. Had the battle ahead already ended? Achilles had actually left. He quickly accelerated his march. Meanwhile, on the other side, when he heard the neighing of the heavenly horse in the sky, Yi, who was facing away from the night sky, a genuine smile touched his lips. His mind calmed down again. Has he taken the bait? Then let's continue with the original plan. He didn't know if the other party was coming for Aetion and Chryses, or for Hector. On the way from Troy to Thebes, during countless days and nights of sparring with Hector, when Achilles was mentioned, Hector's eyes seemed to burn with intense fighting spirit. That sense of destiny, the mutual appreciation between heroes, Yi believed that not only Hector would have such feelings, but perhaps that demigod would feel the same way. The more he interacted with this era, the more he gradually understood the importance Greeks placed on honor and the pride of heroes. The more he felt this way. Even the most ordinary soldiers, when speaking of heroes and honor, would inevitably reveal a warlike and fanatical side. What's more, that demigod, the great hero Achilles, who was as brilliant as a meteor and full of vigor, a hero among heroes, superior to everyone, loved and admired by countless people, would his desire for honor and battle also be multiplied? If he didn't desire this, his parents, to prevent him from dying young on the battlefield as prophesied, disguised him as a maiden among the handmaidens. When he was discovered by Odysseus and invited to board the ship to participate in the battle to Troy, he could have refused based on his own will. It was that restless heart, eager to fight on Greece's biggest stage, that gave rise to the most brilliant yet fleeting hero of Greece, Achilles, who is sighed over. So, you've come closer. A terrifying sense of crisis and oppression was rapidly approaching from behind. Ye dared not look back, dared not stop. Not enough. A little more, run a little further. If I fight here, it'll be too easy to attract the attention of others, and also draw attention to the other battlefield. I can't let the real Hector be discovered. The more critical the moment, the clearer his resilient mental and willpower became, and his mind entered an unparalleled state of calm. Yi began to adjust his breathing, mobilizing all the vitality within his body, squeezing, constantly squeezing more. Then, whoosh tilde. From the sky, an arrow suddenly descended. That was an arrow shot by Achilles. It was also a challenge. I see you. Warrior holding the golden long spear, Hector. Indeed, that god spear, and the weapon that had killed countless of his comrades when he first landed on Troy, was just as he remembered. I have come, do not think you can escape like this. Bang tilde. Although it was only a challenge issued by Achilles. It was a challenge between the strongest heroes. When the arrow fell from the sky, it stirred up a terrifying gust of wind, as if to tear through the atmosphere and blast a crater into the ground, a horrifying display of power. And its target was directly Yi's back. Can't dodge. Instantly, his consciousness told him so. Yi gripped the golden long spear in his hand, a hint of determination and ruthlessness flashing in his eyes. With an overloaded heart, he forcibly drained 1/3 of his vitality in an instant, channeling it towards the original power of the god spear Hector. The next moment, the god spear suddenly burst forth with a brilliant radiance. Boom tilde. With a beautiful flourish of the god spear in his hand, Yi, without looking back, relied purely on instinct to fiercely shatter the incoming arrow. Well done. Achilles praised unreservedly. If he couldn't even manage such a beautiful counterattack, then he wouldn't be worthy of being an opponent recognized by Achilles. And it was at this moment. Yi, with a cold sweat breaking out all over him, endured the trembling and continued to lead the cavalry forward. But at this moment, Achilles suddenly frowned. He noticed something was wrong. Where were the priests of the main god Apollo who were supposed to be protected? The kidnapped captives did not seem to be among these people. And they were too fast. It didn't look like an escort at all, but simply a desperate flight. But that god spear was real. And it didn't matter whether it was Apollo's priests or the so-called highest consul of Thebes. None of that mattered. No one was more valuable than that Hector. Thinking of this, regardless of whether there was a conspiracy, Achilles continued to pursue. The distance between the two sides quickly closed. This time Achilles did not shoot an arrow again, and just as he felt they had gone far enough. On the other side, Achilles suddenly accelerated the speed of his Pegasus, unleashing the divine speed that only a mythical creature could use. Immediately, he streaked forward like a meteor. The shining white Pegasus transformed into a white meteor, crashing towards the ground in front of Yi. Boom tilde. When the enormous roar sounded, rolling dust clouds swept over. The warhorses neighed in fright and reacted strongly. The cavalry were thrown off their horses one after another, while Yi, before being thrown, flipped in the air and leapt off his horse. He plunged the gripped god spear into the ground to maintain his balance. Then he stared intently into the dust ahead. Great hero, Achilles. Finally. He's here. He had fantasized countless times about what it would be like to meet this demigod hero. But when they truly met, the dust seemed to fall into a silent, terrifyingly quiet alternate dimension, as if nothing was there. But the sense of dread in his body, the hairs standing on end, were constantly multiplying. Yi's face suddenly turned pale. Even though his mind was very calm, his body produced a strong, uncomfortable stress response. I'm going to die tilde. I'm going to die tilde. I'm definitely going to die tilde. Die, 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 die. A terrifying killing intent suddenly swept out from the dust. In that instant, Yi seemed to see the illusion of the sword of Damocles, suspended upside down in the sky, slowly descending towards his head and neck. At the same time, a cold voice, like the calm before a suppressed storm, sounded. I didn't expect to be deceived by a mouse. I misjudged. Immediately, a figure slowly, step by step, emerged from the rolling smoke and dust. Holding a long spear in one hand, pointed downwards, a blurred figure slowly emerged from the dust. Whoosh! Tilde. From the dust ahead, a Xing Feng filled with killing intent emanated, and the powerful oppressive force made the cavalrymen's eyes fill with terror, their breathing involuntarily quickening. And just then, they heard a very clear sound of breathing. Not just their own, but also from the dust ahead, in the quiet, fiery hell of the city. The strong body's chest rose and fell rhythmically, and people seemed to hear the heartbeat of the hero Achilles. The powerful heartbeat, with every breath, swept in a large amount of divine ether, and the vigorous vitality was as bright as a torch in the dark night. Even without looking, Yi's powerful intuition had already sensed that overwhelming life aura. So strong. Just the pressure of the aura made him almost unable to move, his body becoming very heavy and stiff. Was Achilles really that powerful? Then how strong was Hector, who could fight Achilles, whose martial arts were unparalleled in his era, and who could contend with a demigod? It was only now that Yi realized how much Hector had held back during their training sessions. The golden long spear, it is indeed that fellow's weapon, but you are not Hector. Where is that fellow? When he fully emerged from the dust, Achilles' handsome, cold face was revealed to everyone, and he questioned in a cold voice. When his cold gaze swept over Yi and the others, it was like a bone-chilling ice blade, so sharp that their skin tingled faintly. Even the cavalrymen, who were fearless of charging a Greek army of dozens, were now plunged into deep fear. For a moment, their vocal cords seemed to have completely lost their function, unable to even utter fearful whimpers. The immense pressure that even Yi could feel, his body frantically warning him, let alone these ordinary cavalrymen. This was not fear of the mind, but the body's instinct, a stress response under immense pressure. Demigod, Achilles. Just as the cavalrymen fell into a cage of fear, their consciousness seemingly on the verge of being snatched away in that instant, having completely given up their lives to be slaughtered by the enemy. Yi took a deep breath and said, "Retreat here. Disperse and go. I will cover your retreat." He stared intently at Achilles before him. Although he was speaking to the soldiers, Yi's gaze dared not leave the other's figure for a moment. That body, as if forged 1,000 times, was casually holding a long spear, yet he always had a feeling that if he averted his gaze for even an instant, the next moment he might not even see how he was beheaded. From which direction would he attack? Left, right? A sweeping blow, or a direct thrust? His steel-like willpower was pushed to its limit at this moment. In just one breath, countless possible directions of Achilles' sudden attack were simulated in his mind, but following the sensed aura, almost every one would end in his death. My lord. As if Yi's previous words had broken the paralysis curse, the cavalryman, who had finally managed to break free from Achilles' powerful aura, spoke in terror, still wanting to say something. Go. Obey orders. Yi said coldly, while turning the long spear in his hand, a flourish of the spear creating a deep furrow in the ground in front of him. Sparks flew. Yi adopted the defensive stance Hector had taught him. And that line drawn a foot in front of him seemed to completely separate the battlefield. As long as Yi was still there, he would absolutely not let Achilles cross that line. But, could he do it? He asked himself, in this era, on this battlefield, was there still a hero who could single-handedly block that legendary demigod? Let's go. The cavalrymen gritted their teeth, and with endless guilt, they scattered according to orders. They were terrified. They had originally been prepared to accompany Knight to the very end, even if Knight drove them away, to face Achilles with him and die together. But at the critical moment, their inner fear and their body's instinct for survival overcame their will. As the cavalry galloped away, Achilles did not pursue them, he merely watched Knight calmly and indifferently. Is that your last will? Honestly, I'm furious, little mouse. Forget it, as long as I kill you, Hector will naturally come to seek revenge from me. Achilles' eyes showed undisguised killing intent. The moment he drove his Pegasus down, he felt Knight's life aura up close, although it was very strong compared to ordinary people, and not much weaker than some minor heroes who were not skilled in combat. This was definitely not the aura of Troy's greatest warrior. The man who could dominate the battlefield with unparalleled might could never be so weak. But that golden spear was real. It seemed that this little mouse, who had deceived him by using Hector's name, must have a close relationship with Troy's strongest hero. Even the strongest weapon was given to him. If he killed this mouse here, Troy's strongest hero would surely be enraged. At this moment, facing Achilles, who appeared indifferent but was actually like the calm before a storm, brewing immense wrath, Knight had no intention of replying. All his energy was already focused on Achilles. However, bang! The figure he had been concentrating on, locking onto without blinking, moved in the blink of an eye, so fast that even his naked eye couldn't react or capture it. Achilles' figure shot out like an arrow from a bowstring. When he blinked again, a brilliant spear had already pierced through and attacked like a roaring hurricane. So fast. A strong sense of crisis instantly pushed Knight's powerful spiritual energy, almost like a direct perception, to its peak, and in response to his original defensive stance, his body almost instinctively reacted first, before his consciousness perceived the attack. Boom! In a flash, Knight quickly turned his body sideways, blocking the attack with his spear. Achilles' spear almost grazed his nose and the shaft of his own spear. And just as Knight dodged the attack, Achilles, who had intended to end Knight's life with a casual spear thrust, let out a soft exclamation of surprise. Then he suddenly pulled back his leg and side-kicked Knight in the waist, sending Knight flying like a cannonball into a nearby wooden house. Countless splinters burst forth. This series of movements was too fluid and swift. Knight, who had just dodged a killing blow, a basic attack, had no chance to react before being struck. Achilles had seemingly ingrained his combat instincts into every part of his body. Cough, cough. In the ruins at this moment, his internal organs felt displaced from that previous blow, and blood mixed with fragments of internal organs suddenly gushed out. Knight's consciousness almost fainted. So strong. The demigod Achilles. Too fierce. For a moment, Knight almost thought he had died. And unlike the burning pain throughout his body, Knight's heart sank to a cold abyss. The disparity was actually so great. As Knight's heart sank to the bottom, only by clashing head-on with this demigod could he truly understand how powerful this hero was. With almost crushing power, without needing to think about martial arts techniques, a casual spear thrust with brute force alone almost ended his life. Knight didn't believe Achilles had no martial arts skills. It could only be said that the difference between them was too vast. He simply wasn't worth this powerful demigod taking him seriously. Next time, I won't let you dodge so easily, Achilles suddenly said. Although he was slightly surprised that Knight had just dodged a fatal blow. It was only for a moment. He could have lost consciousness instantly and died without pain, but he chose the most difficult path for himself. Every second he remained alive now would become a countdown to his death, a desperate wait. Achilles slowly stepped over the shattered wooden door, entering the house. At this moment, Knight's consciousness was extremely scattered. He wanted to force himself to muster strength and counterattack, but he couldn't. His body felt so heavy. He tried desperately to stand up, but even moving his fingers felt incredibly difficult at this moment. It seemed that the previous blow had caused more severe injuries than he had imagined. At this moment, his powerful spiritual energy had instead become a burden. It truly echoed what Achilles had said. Every second of breathing and living at this moment was a desperate wait, a countdown to death. His consciousness was incredibly clear, yet he completely couldn't control his body to save himself. That agony of simply waiting for death was a pain that even many heroes found hard to bear. It's over, a thought flashed through Knight's mind. Perhaps this was in line with what he had initially thought. After contacting Achilles and achieving the goal of obtaining the template, it would be time for him to be killed, ending this period in the simulated universe. But time seemed to slow down infinitely at this moment. Many scenes flashed through Knight's mind. There was the scene of him walking through the desert, enduring solely by willpower to emerge from it. There was the scene of him being confined in a dark, sunless dungeon, his freedom restricted. There was the instantaneous witnessing of a conceptual body of the universe's stellar rivers, more brilliant than a supernova explosion and more magnificent than the Milky Way, impacting him. Finally, there was seeing the sun again in the simulated universe, and witnessing a mad human purgatory on the Troy battlefield. There was the scene by the forest campfire, learning martial arts with Hector, and chatting late into the night. And there was the excitement and thrill in his heart when he obtained the god spear, Hector, immersed in that powerful force, the pinnacle among cold weapons, the charm of a divinely crafted weapon. Even if he didn't truly want to become a hero as Hector had envisioned. When he faced suffering commoners and couldn't help but feel pity, fighting with all his might wielding the god spear, for that moment, he felt as if he had truly become a hero. But the courage he displayed was the courage of knowing that death was not the end, merely a conclusion in the simulated universe. When facing the powerful demigod Achilles, he wasn't truly unafraid of death, he merely selectively forgot about death, as he wouldn't truly die. He thought he could calmly face this death. But just like when he struggled in the desert, a strong and familiar desire for survival surged through him. Even though I know I won't truly die, I still don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die meaninglessly here, in an unobserved corner. It wasn't until he felt his life slipping away that Knight understood his true feelings. This was not the true Greek world. Even if he sacrificed himself here, no one would remember. The powerful calmness brought by that iron will could not stop the strong inner resistance to death at this moment. This will did not truly lose its fear of death. Under the instinct for survival, driven by a strong desire and will, Knight suddenly felt a faint light ignite within his despairing body. That was. The light grew brighter and brighter, although faint and tiny, it was incredibly sacred. It was Apollo's blessing. A light more fervent than hope now illuminated the abyss of despair. Knight felt a warm current flowing through his limbs, and his body seemed to regain some sensation. And it was at this moment that Knight, as if enlightened, understood the true use of Apollo's blessing. The light symbolizing Apollo, the god of light, was a light that could bring hope. No matter how desperate the situation, as long as he had not given up deep in his heart, that blessing, more fervent than hope, would respond to his inner voice and bring miracles. The gospel of miracles. What kind of miracle it would bring, even Apollo himself, who bestowed the blessing, was unsure. It varied completely from person to person. A miracle is called a miracle because it is inherently unpredictable and defies common sense. And the miracle blossoming on Knight at this moment, if one had to describe it with a single word, would be battle continuation. When falling into a near-death state, as long as one's heart does not give up or lose hope, this body can rise countless times and continue fighting before it is completely burned out. And so, as Achilles outside had already stepped into the house, all of this happened in an instant within Knight's consciousness. Feeling that faint life aura, almost about to extinguish, like a candle flickering in the cold wind in the wilderness, ready to go out at any moment. Achilles raised his spear, preparing to thrust it down. Achilles, it's over. It seemed he didn't need a serious second strike, he would just casually end this mouse's life like this. However, just as the cold glint from Achilles' spear tip was about to descend, Knight, who had just gained the survival instinct, battle continuation, and hadn't even had a chance to use it, was about to die from this spear thrust. Knight's pupils constricted. Bang! A sword, flying from an unknown direction, suddenly shot forward, deflecting the spear. Achilles' eyes widened in shock. What? He suddenly turned his head, and what entered his vision was a figure galloping on horseback. Muscles strong and sharp like marble, bronzed skin, and a gleaming helmet made him appear incredibly tall and valiant in the firelight of the night. A pair of eyes, like the golden pupils of a giant dragon, full of deterrence and oppressive power, were locked onto Achilles. The man's scabbard at his waist was now empty. He was slowly taking off the shield from his back while on horseback, wrapping it around his forearm, then he forcefully squeezed the horse's belly with both legs. The warhorse, in pain, suddenly accelerated and charged towards Achilles and Knight. Achilles. Even with an instinctive reaction, Achilles slightly turned his body, and just as the warhorse was about to trample Knight, who was still lying like a corpse, the man suddenly reined in the horse. Using that momentum, the shield on his forearm simultaneously swung heavily towards Achilles. Bang! Achilles was actually sent flying, and then the man single-handedly scooped up Knight from the ground and placed him on the horse's back behind him. Only then did Knight, deeply moved, call out the man's true name, Hector. How did you appear here? Knight's mouth dropped open in shock. The person who arrived was none other than Hector. That's right, on this battlefield, the only hero who could save someone from Achilles' hands was Hector. Of course, I came to save you. To dare face a demigod alone, I felt your courage, Knight. Hector at this moment did not question Knight about why he acted alone, or even used his name to lure Achilles away. There was no anger on his face, only a faint, composed smile, and he gave Knight an admiring look. Admiring what? His courage. It was as if thousands of words were stuck in Knight's throat. With Hector appearing here, his plan had completely failed. Yi gently closed his eyes and took a deep breath. But, although that was the case, at this moment, he felt a huge sense of relief and security in his heart. Better to live a bad life than die a good one. At the brink of life and death, Yi, who suddenly understood this and no longer wanted to die, finally understood what he truly desired. To live freely, where even the god King Zeus could not take his life. For this, He would even kill a demigod for them to see. Upon Hector's appearance, his excited emotions were forcibly calmed down at the last moment. The powerful mental buff immediately allowed him to refocus his attention on the battle. He didn't ask Hector why he didn't leave alone with his men, even though it had been agreed that if he faced Achilles and got into trouble, Hector shouldn't save him. And Hector had been persuaded before. But now he still appeared here. Ye should be grateful that Hector could break their agreement and appear here. Just fighting alongside this man, a complete sense of security surged within him. Hector, can you still fight? Ye, of course. Hector, give me back the god spear first, use this. Saying that, Hector pulled out the sword stuck in the ground, gripped the hilt with one hand, and threw it to Yi. Yi instinctively caught the sword, while simultaneously throwing the god spear in his hand. The two almost simultaneously caught their weapons. In an instant, they both realized that only Hector, wielding the god spear and able to unleash his full martial prowess, could possibly withstand Achilles' attack. The suppression when saving Yi earlier was merely a coincidence of timing. And there would be no trickery in the upcoming head-on confrontation. Adopting the same stance as Yi before, Hector twirled the spear, then skillfully pressed the long spear in front of him, his entire body close to the ground. Yi. That stance is. Unlike Yi, who had only adopted a defensive posture before, that was another offensive stance within the posture, and it was also the preparatory action for what could be called the strongest strike. Achilles. Unlike Achilles, who felt no pressure when Yi previously adopted his stance, Achilles' expression suddenly became solemn when facing Hector in this stance, and upon closer inspection, a hint of fervent fighting spirit could be seen flashing in his eyes. Achilles. Hector. Good, I've finally waited for the main event. I have been waiting for this slaughter for a long time. Today, I will prove to the world who is the strongest hero in Greece. Hector. That doesn't matter. Achilles. WH. The next moment, before he could finish speaking, a sense of crisis suddenly arose in Achilles' heart. For him, who had long been invulnerable after bathing in the river Styx, it had been a long time since he had felt such a crisis. Hector. If you can survive this strike, then we can talk about other things. As the last word fell, Hector suddenly opened his eyes. The god spear Durandal suddenly burst forth with dazzling brilliance. That brilliance impacted the atmosphere, forming visible waves. Hum, hum, hum tilde. Watch closely, Yi. This is the true strongest throwing technique, a single spear strike that incorporates all of my martial arts. Creak, the bones gripping the spear shaft suddenly let out a crisp and powerful sound. Hector suddenly stomped forward with one foot. Then. Achilles. A Pegasus like a meteor. Come quickly to my side. Almost instinctively, Achilles, at the last moment, leapt back into his Pegasus chariot, then urged the Pegasus, holding his long spear, to charge towards Hector. The moment he sensed danger, he used this powerful trump card, combining man and chariot to deal with the incoming strike. Then, whoosh tilde. Boom tilde. Like a roaring azure dragon, thud tilde. Fast, too fast. Achilles, who had just mounted his chariot and hadn't gone far, was suddenly, along with his chariot, as if pierced by a beam cannon, streaking through the night sky. Rumble tilde. A huge explosion echoed through the city. Amidst the towering flames, sparks exploded like rain, and the chariot of the mythical Pegasus was violently overturned and shattered midair. One Pegasus was pierced through the head, spilling a large amount of blood. Like a long dragon capable of flattening an entire city street, it plowed through the ground. Finally, it left behind a landscape that looked as if it had been bombed by a large amount of TNT. This is this Hector's true power? Combining with the inherent power of the god spear Durandal, then unleashed, ancient Greece's strongest throwing technique. Yi watched this scene in shock, completely stunned at this moment. Indeed. Hector also held back. Is this what a true battle between heroes looks like? Cough, cough tilde. Just then, from the rolling smoke and ruins, Achilles' disheveled figure, his head covered in blood, emerged. So that's it, a god spear with armor-piercing and absolute penetration properties. No wonder my body, which is already invulnerable, felt a momentary palpitation. But unfortunately, that strike was a bit off. Achilles suddenly looked up, revealing a pair of eyes filled with killing intent and intense fervor. I admit it, you are indeed a hero worthy of contending with me for the title of the strongest. Achilles looked at his destroyed chariot. And the dead Pegasus, feeling immense heartache. Although the remaining Pegasus were still alive. They had all sustained injuries of varying degrees and were clearly unable to continue fighting. But even without his chariot, he still had his armor, god spear, and invulnerable immortal body, and could still fight. Whoosh tilde. The next moment, Achilles shot towards Hector like an arrow from a bowstring. Bang, bang, thud tilde. The two figures quickly became entangled in battle. Hector, relying on his remaining shield for defense, was at a disadvantage without a weapon for a time. Although that previous spear strike was impressive, as a killing move, it failed to kill the enemy and instead caused him to lose his weapon, immediately putting Hector at a disadvantage. If it were an ordinary battle on the battlefield, Hector, with his powerful martial arts and physique, could defeat many enemies even bare-handed. And it would be very easy to retrieve his weapon. But facing the furious Achilles, a great hero no weaker than him, Hector had no time to be distracted. Ye! Oh no! Ye held the sword in his hand as if it were a hot potato. If he hadn't given the sword to him, Hector could at least still fight with Durandal now. Ye really wanted to throw the sword back, but it probably wouldn't be that easy. If Achilles intercepted it midway, already having the god spear in hand, a demigod who also acquired a holy sword would be even more troublesome. At this moment, cold sweat profusely beaded on Yi's forehead. Think of a way, quickly think of a way. How can I break this deadlock? Cough, cough. Yi coughed up traces of blood, his body growing weaker. Time was too short. There was no good solution, but Yi knew that the demigod had a fatal weakness. Achilles, who had bathed in the river Styx and become immortal, possessed an invulnerable body. But because his mother held his ankles to prevent him from being swept away by the current when he bathed in the river, his heels were not washed by the river Styx. That became Achilles' only weakness. As a blessing-like iron body, when its only weakness is pierced. Then the invulnerable immortal buff also seems to temporarily fail, or even result in severe injury. The hero Paris shot an arrow through his ankle, finally ending this invincible great hero. This hero's physical body did not seem as strong as other mythological figures, such as Siegfried, who became invulnerable after bathing in dragon's blood. If it were Siegfried's level of physical body, even an arrow in the foot would not have led to such an easy death. His heel. Yi murmured in his heart. In an instant, as if possessed, he stared intently at Achilles' swift and powerful figure, like a dance on the battlefield. There was only one chance. If it failed, it would inevitably alert Achilles, and with Achilles protected by divine armor and shield. Once he was on guard about his weakness, they would have very little chance of hitting his heel again. At this moment, Yi regretted not telling Hector about Achilles' weakness sooner. Of course, this was also partly due to his complete inability to explain why he knew the other party's weakness. Although Yi could shoot arrows, his archery was not good enough to kill this demigod with a single arrow across the battlefield like Paris. But Yi knew another skill very similar to archery, throwing techniques. At this moment, Yi's mind was filled with the scene of Hector, not long ago, full of confidence, with a slight smile, grimly staring at the enemy and finally unleashing a world-shattering spear strike. After witnessing that strike, he seemed to have a new understanding of throwing techniques. But, it's not enough. If it's only this level, it's definitely not enough. So, he was going to cheat. Yi. Black Tower. In his ears were the sounds of spears and shields clashing and colliding. The voice, calling out the name, Herta. In the heart of the night, suddenly vanished in an instant. The next moment, Knight's consciousness plunged into a special space. A dreamlike world, as if standing in a sea of quanta, suddenly appeared before his eyes. This was the transfer station of the simulated universe, and also a place for Knight to pause his progress, temporarily rest, and strengthen himself. At this moment, Herta had long been waiting there. As soon as his consciousness entered this space, the injuries on Knight's body seemed to disappear, restoring him to his original state. Herta, you finally decided to come in. How is it? It seems you've already obtained the heavenly mandate you desired. Knight, load the Achilles heavenly mandate template for me. Without much unnecessary talk, Knight spoke directly. His expression had calmed down, but the depths of his eyes were as profound as a tranquil abyss. He was firm and cold, his voice so overbearing it was frightening, beyond doubt. Herta's lips curled slightly, seemingly quite fond of Knight's current demeanor. Understood, my master. Then let it be as you wish. When Herta uttered the last word, the next moment, Knight's consciousness suddenly plunged into darkness. The sound of dripping water could be heard. And then Knight felt a warm sensation, as if both his mind and body had sublimated. Then, familiar concepts appeared in his mind, one after another. Concept: an impenetrable body. Concept: God-forged armaments, God spear, armor, and shield set. Concept: a swift Pegasus chariot, like a meteor. Finally, Achilles' meticulously honed martial arts transformed into memory nourishment and entered Knight's mind. Although it didn't directly grant him mastery of all of Achilles' combat techniques. It was as if a teacher had already meticulously analyzed all the principles, just waiting for him to spend time slowly digesting them. As long as he continuously imitated the scenes in his memory. One day, sooner or later, he too would be able to recreate the figure of that powerful hero, charging like a meteor, in battle. At this moment, the infusion of this martial arts memory nourishment provided Knight with immense help. It instantly boosted his confidence for the battles ahead. The luxurious Achilles gift package completely stunned Knight. The enhancement brought by the heavenly mandate template was simply too powerful. He could even use it to reverse engineer Achilles' weaknesses in combat. Without hesitation, and without even time to catch up with Herta, Knight quickly returned to the simulated universe. As his consciousness dimmed and then regained clarity, he was now back on the street, engulfed in flames. The clang of weapons sparking still ringing in his ears. Feeling his body become weak again. Knight. He was blessed with the concept of being impenetrable, but it didn't heal his previous injuries. To possess an impenetrable body of steel yet lack a matching powerful recovery ability. That was truly regrettable. Fortunately, not only did he not have it, but Achilles didn't either. Thinking this, his mind seemed to balance out considerably. If this demigod's recovery ability was also excellent, he wouldn't have easily perished from an arrow in his heel. And at this moment, although his body's recovery was slow, relying on battle continuation, Knight dragged his broken body towards the previous ruins. He needed to retrieve the god spear, Hector. Every second counted. Time passed bit by bit, as Knight searched along the long stretch of ruins towards its end. On the other side, Hector was currently engaged in a bitter struggle. He had been careless. At this moment, Hector's heart was incredibly heavy and suppressed. What was originally a confident, infallible strike had not managed to eliminate this demigod. Although he had destroyed his Pegasus chariot, which was a significant achievement, in comparison, he also lost the weapon in his hand, which was a huge loss. Ever since he learned that Achilles possessed an impenetrable body, Hector had been contemplating how to deal with this demigod. Finally, he thought of it. That was to rely on the god spear, Hector's ability to pierce through everything and be indestructible. To try and break through his impenetrable body. Believing that prolonged combat had a higher chance of failure, he decided to unleash his ultimate killing move from the start. Hector, aiming for a surprise attack, had thrown the strongest spear in history with a mindset of, succeed or die trying. But, it failed. No, did it really fail? Hector, who was struggling to resist the attacks, seemed to notice something, and his heart suddenly became calmer than ever. A slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Facing Achilles, who was relentlessly attacking, he showed no fear. It was as if the one on the verge of losing his life, deeply in crisis, was not him, but the opponent. Hector. Catch. As the battle between Achilles and Hector approached its climax, a voice suddenly came from afar. It was Knight's call. Almost instinctively, both of their minds shifted slightly. And at this moment, a precious sword was hurled at high speed towards the center of the battlefield. Durandal. While the sword was still in midair, both of them simultaneously recognized its true identity. Achilles. It won't be that easy for you to regain your weapon. Just as Hector was about to step forward to catch the sword, Achilles pressed down with his spear, forcing Hector to block with his shield. Then Achilles powerfully bounced back into the air, his long spear simultaneously spinning fluidly, and his entire body rotated in the air, perfectly intercepting Durandal's flight path. Bang tilde. Durandal was directly bounced away. However, upon seeing this, Hector's face not only showed no disappointment, but instead revealed a hint of a smile. A beautiful strike, but you fell for it, Achilles. I wasn't the only one fighting on this battlefield from beginning to end. Underestimating my friend's power too much, that is the only way you could possibly be defeated. Now's the time. Hector shouted with sharp eyes, reminding Knight that the moment was ripe. Achilles was already in midair, without a point of leverage. There was no easier time to attack him than now. If you want to attack, do it now. At this moment, Achilles in midair felt a bad premonition, sensing that something was wrong. What? However. Too late tilde. Crack. Pulling the god spear, Hector, completely out of the ruins, Knight rotated the spear, then spun it again to assume a stance. Unlike the defensive stance he took when first facing Achilles. Knight's legs were now tensed, and he stomped hard on the ground. Boom. Tilde. Splintered wood flew, and a plank beneath Knight's foot directly cracked and sprang away. While Knight slowly closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. At this moment, he forgot everything before him, leaving only that astonishing spear strike from his memory. Essence, spirit, and mind, focused on one point. Reaching the pinnacle. Hector's almost divine martial arts spear, combined with Achilles' familiar combat rhythm and spear techniques, infinitely magnified his weaknesses. At this very moment, in heaven and on earth, no one in the entire Greece universe was more familiar with Achilles' fighting style and habits than Knight. Because of this, Knight could easily guide Achilles to make the reactions he desired. And facing Achilles, who had arrogantly exposed himself in midair. He had his chance, and only this one chance. Time at this moment seemed to fall into tranquility. Knight completely calmed down, feeling the power within the god spear, and then draw. Buzz, buzz. Not as dazzling as when Hector used it before, but a subtle glow gradually began to spread along the spear shaft. He succeeded on his very first attempt. If Hector had seen this scene in the past, he would undoubtedly have applauded him endlessly. Not enough, god spear. Lend me more power. If thought can trigger miracles. Oh, Lord of Light, as holy as the sun, let your blessing also transform into power, and let this body burn. Knight, who had previously comprehended the use of Apollo's blessing in despair. He gradually understood the true usage of God-forged armaments. Since they were God-forged armaments, weapons imbued with divine power, they could naturally be driven in the same manner. At this moment, the will in his heart had already reached its peak. Yi's consciousness looked inward, once again finding that glimmer of light in the darkness, caught it. Hope. Boom tilde. The power of light suddenly shone brightly, beginning to respond to Yi. Battle continuation sublimation, successful. At this point, it should be called, undying fierce battle. As long as his consciousness had not perished, even if his body was severely damaged, he could still forcibly drive it and unleash the power of his peak period. Not only that, but at this moment, the white light flowed along Yi's arm towards the god spear, Hector. When that trace of divine blessing poured into the spear, the god spear, Hector, let out a clear ringing sound, completely responding to Yi. He could use it, if it was at this moment. Everything happened in an instant. At this moment, around Yi, where he couldn't see with his open eyes, countless white specks of light suddenly began to rise from the ground. Those countless specks of light were the scattered radiance produced by the combination of divine power, the God Spear, and Yi's life force. Although faint, they were incredibly hot. Witness the spear of a shooting star. Achilles. When all the power was stirred to its peak, a subtle feeling arose, allowing Yi's spear art to break through again, linking and merging the strongest throwing technique with the Achilles' inherited spear strike. The next moment, Yi suddenly threw the god spear in his hand. Whoosh tilde. Boom tilde. The rotating god spear, Hector, like an arrow leaving the bowstring, carried a white radiance and suddenly shot rapidly towards Achilles in the sky. In the night sky, the attack, like a meteor streaking by, caused Achilles' pupils to lose focus and show disbelief for a moment. This is. The radiance of the meteor path seemed to flash and open before his eyes, that god spear, mixed with a familiar scent. When it shone in the sky, it was like a hurricane sweeping through. Although its destructive power and the sense of power oppression were not as strong as Hector's before, the meaning behind it had a greater mental impact on Achilles. Impossible. This is mine. Achilles' eyes were about to burst. Bang tilde. Achilles in midair was directly pierced by a white light, as if struck by an aurora. Achilles' body was sent flying. Finally, he fell into the wooden house where Yi was initially sent flying, and immediately fell silent. Did it succeed? At this moment, Yi and Hector both stared intently into the wooden house. Although the god spear, Hector, possessed the characteristic of piercing through everything, the wielder's strength was, after all, limited. It was still unlikely for Yi to kill Achilles with his current strength. But as long as it could break through the defense of Achilles' immortal body, that would be enough. Cough cough tilde. Suddenly, a coughing sound came from inside the wooden house. Then, with a rumble, the entire wooden house suddenly collapsed. No longer able to withstand the destruction, it simply vanished. And Achilles pushed aside the wooden planks in front of him and crawled out of the ruins. At this moment, he was extremely disheveled, his face pale and weak, but his chest was completely intact. It was as if the previous spear strike had not pierced him, but merely sent him flying with its powerful impact. However, three pairs of eyes met intensely. Yi, Hector, Achilles. As they stared at each other, they suddenly saw the bloody tears streaming from Achilles' eyes and mouth. Achilles himself, who reacted first, touched his face with his hand. Blood blurred his vision. This was the first time he had experienced something like this. When he looked at the blood in his palm, Achilles' expression was momentarily stunned. His immortal body was broken. His invulnerable immortal body, after being bathed in the river Styx, was not truly immortal, it also had weaknesses. Once an attack exceeded his tolerance, or when facing instant death attacks or armor-piercing attacks, he would still be injured. Yi also realized something after obtaining Achilles' destiny template. It wasn't absolutely necessary to pierce the ankle to break that steel body. Combining Achilles' template combat habits, he threw what he believed to be the best angled spear. And once it bled, the steel body would be severely damaged and its effect completely weakened in a short period, becoming a flesh and blood body no different from others. The concept of penetration in that spear strike just now shattered his immortal body. Realizing this, Achilles' face changed drastically. He looked at Yi, his face stained with blood, the existence he had previously not taken seriously. After a long pause, he gritted his teeth and said, "I misjudged you. You fellow. You did a really good job. Although I don't know where you learned my spear art, and combined it with Hector's throwing technique. But, that spear strike, it was good." He gestured with his eyes, asking if he wouldn't explain the origin of the spear art. But Yi's face was cold, and he quietly looked at Achilles, with no intention of responding. Rather, he simply couldn't respond. He couldn't possibly say, "I used a cheat to steal your template," stole his account to his face. "Now yours is mine, right?" Finally, Yi spoke, but what he said immediately hit Achilles' weak spot. Your immortal body seems to be having problems, Achilles. Hector also added with a smile, the invulnerable steel body is bleeding, it seems demigods are not invincible after all. Achilles, do you want to kill me? Very well. Then try to take my head. Even without a steel body, I am still fearless in any battle. Responding with such defiance, Achilles resumed his fighting stance. And for a moment, the atmosphere on the entire battlefield became incredibly tense again. But Achilles was cursing inwardly. And at this moment, he even felt a faint unease and heaviness in his heart. If it were just Hector, even if he got his weapon back, he would not be afraid. But with Yi, who could also use the power of the god spear, Hector. Two opponents he could defeat in a one-on-one fight. Combined, they brought him a strong sense of threat. His Pegasus chariot was gone, his steel body was broken, all he had left to rely on were the long spear in his hand and the armor on his body, as well as his fearless courage. But Achilles did not choose to escape. Or rather, his pride would not allow him to flee at this moment. And just then, Hector spoke, "You may leave." Achilles was astonished. What? Hector. I am not confident I can keep you here. Continuing to fight would likely result in a mutually destructive situation. Let's postpone this battle for later. How about it? He said it was likely a mutually destructive situation. In reality, it was more likely that Yi would die, Achilles would die, and Hector would be the one to survive. After all, the only one present who was relatively unharmed and whose combat power remained at its peak was Hector. Although he didn't know why Yi was able to unleash such astonishing power with his severely damaged body just now. Hector could feel that Yi's life force was very weak. Yet it carried a resilient feeling full of hopeful radiance. If the fight continued, he worried that Yi would die here. And continuing to fight Achilles was like a trapped beast fighting to the death. No one could imagine how much combat power a demigod hero could unleash when facing a life-threatening crisis. If Achilles were to unleash his full power again, not only Yi, but perhaps even Hector could be left behind. Ending the battle here was the best outcome for both Achilles and Hector. Finally, Achilles clicked his tongue in displeasure and withdrew the tip of his spear that was pointed at the two of them. Then he put his hand to his mouth and whistled, summoning a surviving Pegasus. Achilles then swung himself onto its back. With his chariot gone, he could only ride a horse himself. He took one last deep look at Hector and Yi. I will lead my soldiers away from Thebes. This time, I lost. When we meet on the battlefield next time, I will personally cut off your heads. Achilles spoke with a gaze filled with killing intent. That momentary pressure made Yi feel cold all over, sending shivers down his spine. This time, the opponent was unprepared, and combined with various coincidental factors, he was severely wounded. Next time, if it's a direct confrontation, facing Achilles, who now possesses an undead body, won't be as easy. But he also knew that with their current state, trying to keep Achilles was utterly unrealistic. Being targeted by a demigod hero, the pressure was truly immense. When Achilles rode away on his Pegasus. At this moment, the first ray of dawn rose on the horizon, and he realized the battle was finally over, he was temporarily safe. His tightly strung nerves suddenly relaxed, then his vision went black, and his consciousness instantly scattered. His entire brain was instantly pierced with pain, as if struck hard by a hammer, so painful that he couldn't even scream. He fainted instantly. And before his body hit the ground, it was already caught by Hector. You have successfully replicated his destiny from Achilles. After loading the demigod hero template, and with Hector's cooperation, you successfully repelled Achilles, this great hero of Greece. You comprehended the true meaning of divine blessing during the battle. Under the illumination of the miracle of light, you combined the spear skills from the Achilles template with the throwing technique granted by Hector, and created a spear strike that opened the path of the meteor. If Achilles' path of the meteor was a spear impact like a comet's charge, carried out with his Pegasus, then your path of the meteor is a brilliant spear strike that brings hope, carves through despair, and pierces the night sky. After the battle, the survival instinct shut down, and the after effects of the battle followed. Your body, which was already immobile due to severe injuries, had its life force continuously burned away due to the forced battle just now, becoming like a flickering candle in the wind, capable of extinguishing at any moment. Hector was extremely anxious after checking your life status. After Achilles withdrew his troops, he immediately led his soldiers to protect the remaining survivors of Thebes city and retreated towards Troy. At the same time, he took you to seek the help and treatment of the high priest, Chryses. Because of Apollo's blessing on you, High Priest Chryses regarded you with great importance and used all his strength to treat your body. But just like unburnable undead, your internal organs were too severely damaged, making repair very difficult. Detecting changes in a crucial historical turning point, major event progress altered, the simulated universe test results are out. Do you want to save here? Inside the transfer station, as his consciousness slowly awakened, what he heard was Herta's voice, tinged with a smile, asking, "Is the simulated universe test over? You could say it's over. And you could say it's not. Your fame from the battle on the Thebes battlefield, and your cooperation with Hector in defeating the demigod Achilles, spread throughout Greece. At the same time, because of you, many people were saved. This led history to begin moving in a completely different direction. You can choose to save here. Next time you test the simulated universe, you can directly choose this point in time and start a new journey based on the outcome of the previous simulation." At this moment, Herta was patiently explaining to him. Of course, in the previous test, your physical body in that conceptual universe was equivalent to dead. Although it was quite cool when you finally burst forth and broke through Achilles' undead body. But the cost of that burst was that your life force, like a flickering candle in the wind, was completely burned out. Even undead have more profound foundations than you. Save it. How will my identity be calculated in the next simulation? Herta, it will assume a world line where you were successfully saved and continue the simulation. So that's how it is. In other words, Hector and the others in that universe would only think he was severely injured and healed. And they would never know that he had already died once. That's good too, he didn't want to suddenly create a zombie setting in Greece. Or adopt other alternate identities. Troy. I will return. But for now, let me resolve my current situation in reality. Finally, when he was settling accounts in his consciousness space, while organizing the gains from this simulated universe, he realized just how abundant his foundations had become. First was Achilles' destiny template. When this template was inherited into reality, although it couldn't be fully applied directly like in the simulated universe, it was largely similar. The template applied some conceptual enhancements, meaning it raised his upper limit. And this upper limit wasn't simply about talent or similar things. Rather, it was roughly equivalent to a max-level character reincarnating and starting over. Where leveling up before reaching max level was as fast as a rocket, without any bottlenecks. The fusion of the destiny template in reality was equivalent to giving his physical body a buffer and adaptation period, gradually absorbing external energy and combining it with internal training cycles. To restore his original strength, its proper form, undead body, impenetrable steel body, etc. He had anticipated this from the beginning. But the next items were an unexpected surprise. God Spear, Hector conceptual entity. Due to forging a special destiny with this God Spear in the simulated universe, he gained the recognition of its original owner and the spear itself. Thus, this spear actively responded to him. Returning to reality from the Greece universe as a conceptual entity. Although the conceptual entity God Spear didn't have a physical body. It was like the soul of the spear. As long as he held a weapon that, in his consciousness, was categorized as a long spear, he could apply the power of God's spear Hector to the weapon, allowing any mortal weapon to immediately gain the sharpness and hardness equivalent to a God-forged armament, and even mobilize part of the divine power of a God-forged armament. He hit the jackpot. God-forged armament. Just how powerful was this weapon? Having personally used it to pierce the undead body of a demigod, he was incredibly clear about its power. It could be said that his combat power, holding God's spear Hector, and not holding God's spear Hector, differed by 100,000 li. 100 of himself couldn't defeat one of himself holding the God spear. In the simulated universe, he had originally felt a bit guilty for freeloading Hector's weapon, but now he was no longer calm. He even regretted it a bit. If he had known that weapons could be brought out in conceptual form. If he had just stripped Hector's entire set, and even Achilles' entire set, and armed himself to the teeth. Where in the vast world could he not go? As long as the mystery level of this world wasn't very high. Then he could just go wild. Wait. It seems he really did strip Achilles bare. He suddenly found some good things in the inheritance template. Before, he was so focused on fighting that he didn't have much time to check what exactly the Achilles template brought. But he had initially understood that he inherited the conceptual entities of Achilles' god spear, shield, and armor. These things wouldn't also be. When he tried to release the three conceptual entities from his consciousness space. Sure enough, their nature of existence was exactly the same as God spear Hector. So now he had two god spears in his hand. Achilles' spear. Machaira's spear was also, without a doubt, a god-forged armament. And he even felt a concept similar to Hector's god spear within it, the characteristic of piercing through everything. Achilles and Hector, these two were practically carved from the same mold. Except for not having an undead body, Hector's equipment and Achilles' were not identical, but rather, if you have it, I have it too. And if he remembered correctly, Achilles was also a hero skilled in throwing, but he wasn't as famous as Hector in throwing techniques. After all, Hector had once attacked the god-forged armament, the shield of Ajax, and nearly shattered this so-called strongest shield, which is why Hector's prowess in throwing techniques became widely known in mythology. Two spears, he murmured. He didn't want to go the dual-wielding route, not because he wasn't interested in dual spear techniques, but because the skills he learned from both Achilles and Hector had no related combat techniques. He could only temporarily give up the beautiful image of holding two god spears in his mind. And if he had to choose one of the two spears to use. Indeed, he still preferred the one and only gift Hector gave him. Not only was it easy to use, but it also held special significance. It was also because of it that he was able to turn the tide in one fell swoop and unleash that meteor-like spear strike. Moreover, the other god-forged armaments were inherited. Only this one was directly recognized and then flew out of the simulated universe with him. Isn't a god-forged armament that chases after you fragrant? He could only say, it smelled heavenly. Just for this friendship, he absolutely couldn't let it lose. When Herta learned of Yi's concerns and final decision. Herta, it's fine. If you're worried about the concept bodies of the god-forged armaments overlapping. I actually have a solution. Take one as the primary and the other as the secondary, then merge their concept bodies into one. This can strengthen their inherent characteristics. Since they are concept bodies and lack physical form, their combination is quite feasible. The more similar the characteristics of the concept bodies, the easier they are to fuse. Yi was somewhat tempted by what she said. But in the end, he still chose not to fuse Achilles' spear. He still had other ideas in his heart. Outside. In the long unseen real-world dungeon. Yi opened his eyes, and at this moment, the sense of time passing through his body, his biological clock, clearly told him that the few days he experienced in the simulated universe world did not overlap much with real-world time, or rather, the flow of time had slowed down. It was as if a second was infinitely stretched. One moment, he had just entered the consciousness world within the star core and met Herta. The next moment, he was back in reality. According to the feeling from his biological clock, half a year in the simulated universe was roughly only about an hour in the outside world. As long as he was certain that his residence in reality was relatively safe, he could stay in the simulated universe for a longer period with peace of mind. And at this moment, everything he experienced and the great feats he accomplished in the Greece universe. began to feed back into his physical body. In addition to the Achilles template, the god spear Hector concept body, and the skills and combat experience learned from the simulated universe. The great achievements and legends Yi completed in the simulated universe transformed into nourishment, coming from the concept body of the Greece universe, and began to feed back into Yi's physical body. And this form of improvement, if one had to describe it, was like the gods in the Danmachi world helping humans unlock the shackles of their physical potential, allowing for infinite improvement as long as they trained and accomplished great deeds. But compared to the feedback of divine blood, the feedback from the world was far more abundant and generous. Even if it was just a concept body of a universe. At this moment, Yi's physical body, from its original weakened state, began to recover health at a visible speed, and at the same time, his originally thin body also began to become strong, gradually approaching the muscular physiques of Greek heroes like Hector and Achilles. Abs and chest muscles began to appear. This instantly allowed Yi's already strong foundation to quickly complete a substantial initial accumulation. Now, Yi felt that even with bare hands, he could fight against a dozen strong Greek soldiers. And if he used the concept body of the god-forged armament, then he would truly possess hero-level combat power. It seems it's time to find an opportunity to leave this place. The feeling of restricted freedom is unbearable for even a moment. If not for this, he would have already started his second simulated universe run, continuing to grow stronger on the Troy battlefield. He wanted to live an incredibly free life. And no one could restrict his right to exist. Not even Zeus, the king of the gods. Let alone a mere slave owner. And just as Yi was thinking about how to get a weapon. As long as he had a weapon, he could use the god-forged armament. Then he could easily break out at any time. Even seek revenge on those black-hearted human traffickers who sold him here. Yi had not forgotten who caused him to fall into his current predicament. Just then, the slave owner suddenly returned to the dungeon with many of his men, loudly announcing, "Line up, everyone. A big client has arrived. All of you, look lively. If you are chosen by the esteemed guest, perhaps you will be able to live a good life without worrying about food." The slave owner suddenly led a large group of slaves out of the dungeon. Because their hands and feet were bound by iron chains, and there were many of the slave owner's thugs watching. The slaves could only obediently follow orders and come out one by one. But their expressions were numb. And they were completely uninterested in the good life the slave owner spoke of, which came from being chosen by an esteemed guest. How could a slave possibly live a good life? Even if bought by someone, it was merely moving from one hell to another, continuing to suffer bullying. If one had a good appearance, they might hope to be chosen by nobles or noblewomen to become male consorts. Otherwise, they could only do hard labor, or even dangerous things, such as being sent into the gladiatorial arena to fight lions and powerful gladiators. At this moment, Yi also frowned and followed the crowd. Somewhat unclear about what this slave owner intended to do. But before he got a weapon, he didn't plan to act rashly. After that, they walked for a long time, with their eyes covered by cloth bags midway. After an unknown period of walking, they were already far from where the dungeon was located. Yi could feel that they had never reached the outside world. Finally, they collectively stopped at one location. "All right, we're here, boys." The slave owner's disgusting voice came from beside him. The next moment, the cloth bags were removed one by one. And only then did Yi survey his current situation. He was behind a large iron gate. And through the iron bars, he saw a shocking and terrifying sight. It was a vast underground plaza. The interior of the plaza was divided into several separated areas. Among them were pools with visible crocodiles, pits full of venomous snakes, and crackling, scorching fire spikes and blade forests. But the most striking was a cage located in the center of the plaza. Inside the cage, a shirtless, brown-skinned male slave held a wooden weapon, looking at what was in front of him with fear. A group of lions surrounded his cage. The slave continuously wailed in terror, begging the lions not to come closer. But the pride of lions kept approaching. At this moment, faint laughter and cheers came from above the plaza. And looking up, Yi realized that this was a building structure similar to an indoor gladiatorial arena. And the upper circle was like the spectator stands in an ancient Rome arena. Those crazy laughs seemed very satisfied with the drama below. The more fear and disheveled the slave trapped in the cage showed, the louder and happier they laughed. Some even shouted for the lions to quickly eat him, the slave. Presumably, these were the so-called esteemed guests. Yi's heart chilled when he saw this scene. And during the time Yi was observing, the other slaves who also noticed the scene before them finally showed traces of terror in their numb eyes, fearing that they too would end up in the same situation as the person in the cage in the plaza. For a moment, many slaves were scared to tears. No, no, no. We're not going to have to enter the terrifying place later, are we? Silence. You pigs who only waste food every day. Do not speak or converse without my command. If I find anyone disobeying orders, then I will throw them in to keep that fellow in the cage company. The slave owner suddenly roared in anger. The slaves immediately fell silent, becoming as quiet as cicadas in winter. And an overwhelming panic rose in their hearts. No one wanted to be locked in that cage to feed the lions. And at this moment, in the plaza, a lion had already begun to paw and scratch at the cage. It seemed to be trying to break open the cage to hunt the slave inside. The cage was nailed to the ground. Therefore, it was not knocked over by the lion, but it kept making earth-shattering noises. Amidst the clanging sounds, the fear in the eyes of the slave in the cage almost solidified and overflowed. He screamed, continuously curling his body, dodging the lions from all directions. And after screaming for an unknown duration, seeing that the lion couldn't break in for a long time, it seemed that hiding in the cage would keep them safe, and it only looked scary. The slaves no longer seemed as terrified as they were at first. Meanwhile, the vips above had already started cursing. They didn't spend money to watch such a boring scene. Please, distinguished guests, calm down, an interesting scene will appear soon. Hearing the shouts from above, the slave owner no longer paid attention to the slaves, but instead hurried out to appease the distinguished guests, while ordering that it was time for the next step. He wouldn't be so kind as to build a cage specifically to protect the slaves. From the various vicious and sinister arrangements in this square, one could see how depraved this game was. A grotesque farce performed for the enjoyment of the rich and nobles. From the moment the slaves were locked into that iron cage, their fate was already sealed. The rest of their lives would be like clowns on a stage, manipulated by others. Want to guess what that depraved slave owner will do next? I don't think you'd want to know. An aged voice suddenly sounded beside Yi. An old slave actually started talking to him. Yi subconsciously said, "What? The old man, I can tell, among everyone here, you're the bravest." While everyone else was scared out of their wits, only your figure remained unshaken. People like you either have something to rely on, or they've been completely scared silly. But I can see that your gaze is very calm, neither foolish nor crazy. Tell me, you don't think that people who have fallen to this place still have a chance to escape, do you? The old man muttered. At the same time, he warned him not to even think about escaping. No one who had been captured by Spiker, the slave owner's name, had ever escaped. And the consequences of being caught after attempting to escape, you wouldn't want to know. If you still hold any lucky about that slave owner's ruthlessness. The old man, soon, someone will pour buckets of snakes from above onto that iron cage. What do you think the reaction of the people hiding inside will be? The cage's lock isn't tightly closed. The difference between humans and beasts like lions, animals, is that humans possess wisdom and intellect, and are good at using tools. An iron cage that a lion couldn't open after pawing at it for a long time can be easily opened by pulling the chain from the inside. Of course, the iron cage, while a restraint, is also a sanctuary. But to be bitten to death by venomous snakes, crawling all over your body, or choose to walk out of the iron cage. These devils simply left you no choice. The old man grew more and more terrified as he spoke, many heart-palpitating expressions flashing in his eyes, and he trembled all over. Yi also realized at this point that the other party was not so much talking to him as using the conversation to release his inner fear. But unexpectedly, the other party actually knew so much. And sure enough, as Yi continued to watch, the scene had already changed. Someone poured buckets of venomous snakes from above, and soon countless venomous snakes rained down, instantly covering the iron cage. The densely packed venomous snakes immediately made the people inside the iron cage scream in greater panic and fear than when they had faced the lion's gaze earlier. The male slave inside the cage turned incredibly pale, almost fainting from fright. This chilling scene, let alone ordinary slaves, even Yi would absolutely not want to face. His trypophobia was about to act up, not to mention that snakes, as animals, naturally inspire a sense of fear. Compared to the king of beasts, although their power might not be as destructive, they are more malicious and harder to guard against. Venomous snakes are sinister and good at lurking. And an enemy who delivers a fatal blow at a crucial moment is far more chilling than a visible strong foe. He always felt that this game seemed familiar, as if he had heard of it somewhere before. It should be something enjoyed by those perverted nobles in the barbaric Middle Ages. As Yi continued to watch. At this moment, under the dual threat, when the first snake fell and hung on the male slave's arm. The male slave let out a tragic scream, finally unable to endure the dual physiological and psychological pressure, and violently pulled open the chain, then opened the cage door and rushed out. The old man, he chose to open the cage door and become food for the lions. What a foolish decision. But, who's to say it isn't? This is also a helpless decision, isn't it? No matter who encountered that situation, it would be difficult to make a third choice. Yi suddenly said, perhaps he can defeat the lion with the weapon in his hand. The old man, no, no, no. Even if he possesses strength comparable to the heroes in Greek mythology. Even if he dealt with the pride of lions, he couldn't survive. Do you see the other few areas? The slave owner's subordinates will force him into those areas. Until he passes all of them, only then might he survive. This interrogative tone is very spiritual. Yi instantly understood the old man's thoughts. He meant that the slave owner was completely untrustworthy, right? Even if someone could truly pass all those terrifying areas. If the slave didn't die successfully, making the audience unsatisfied. Then would the enraged slave owner truly grant the slave freedom? Perhaps a new, more terrifying trial awaited him, or he would be dragged back and tortured to death. However, in the old man's words, Yi also grasped a key factor. He mentioned Greek mythology. Apparently, this was not another world, and most likely it was Western Europe after the Greek era, considering the medieval appearance, plus this barbaric and bloody gladiator-like method. Yi thought of a country that inherited ancient Greece. Yi, I haven't run into ancient Rome, have I? The old man was still muttering, shivering as he spoke. He can't get through. Behind there are alligator pits, elephant riders, and even mountains of blades and forests of fire. Every one of them is a trial of certain death for ordinary people. How can mere flesh and blood withstand the malice of these devils? Come on, young man, let us pray together to the 12 main gods. Hopefully, we won't be chosen. I imagine after seeing this, your courage must have dissipated, right? Don't feel ashamed, no one facing this scene can muster the courage to resist. Without responding to the old man, Yi suddenly retorted, do you know ancient Rome? The old man was slightly stunned for a moment, then subconsciously said, isn't this Rome? Yi's heart grew even calmer, as expected. And at this moment, he roughly knew which 12 main gods the old man was referring to. Led by the king of gods, Jupiter. They were almost exact replicas of the Greek mythology 12 main gods' backstories, just with changed names, gods overlaid with a Roman mythology veneer. Those 12 main gods, placed in Rome, were still the strongest righteous gods. But now, Yi didn't have time to think so much. A new development had already occurred on the field. The male slave who chose to escape the cage didn't last even 2 minutes. He was quickly tackled by the surrounding lion pride, then screamed and howled as he was torn to shreds. The already ravenous lions didn't care about the prey's wails at all. And at this moment, hearing that wail, the beasts became even more ferocious, and even the crowd on the platform above cheered with increasing excitement. Ha ha ha. Excellent. Exciting. Spiker, you are truly a genius. To have come up with such a new way to torment people. If you don't escape, you'll be bitten to death by venomous snakes. If you escape, you'll be attacked by a pride of lions and become their food. This is truly too exciting. I can see the despair on that slave's face multiplying. A dilemma of human nature. Kill him, that's it, ha 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 ha. Tear his flesh to shreds, eat this dirty rat. In the audience stands on the high platform, many people cheered excitedly. Screaming hysterically, singing loudly. Blood and money, at this moment, seemed to be the only things that could stimulate their nerves. They began throwing large amounts of coins into the square below. The slave owner couldn't stop smiling when he saw this scene. This reversal tactic indeed worked very well. Taking advantage of the distinguished guest's high spirits. The slave owner immediately announced loudly. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to see how other types of farm tools react when trapped in an iron cage? If any distinguished guests are interested, you can come here to select various slaves and assign the candidates for the next game. Whether it's a strong gladiator, an elderly person, a child, or even a beautiful young girl, we offer choices here. As long as you are generous, we will fulfill any service you desire. Of course, different slaves have slightly different prices. Premium slaves will be a bit more expensive, and we hope our esteemed guests understand. However, when the slave owner finished speaking, not many people stepped forward. Clearly, even if the nobles were rich, they weren't foolish enough to spend money on slaves just to watch a show. Especially a show that everyone could enjoy. They weren't unwilling to spend the money. But perhaps someone would choose to select a slave, and then they could watch a good show for free, so why not? Seeing the esteemed guests above discussing and whispering, but none willing to open their wallets. The slave owner's face instantly turned ashen. HMPH. A bunch of cheapskates. He cursed under his breath, but his face still wore a smile, not daring to show any negative emotions that might scare away these esteemed guests. Seeing that no wealthy patrons chose the custom slave selection mode, he couldn't let the atmosphere cool down. The slave owner decided to release a few ordinary farm tools, first to thoroughly stir up the atmosphere. Once the patrons were excited, they would naturally be unable to resist spending money. This trick, it never failed. The slave owner's gaze swept across the crowd and quickly noticed Knight, who stood out like a crane among chickens, possessing excellent temperament and appearance. But the slave owner's gaze shifted away the next moment. Such high-grade slaves were brought here only to intimidate them, to make them behave themselves later. But the slave owner truly had no intention of squandering such slaves on this kind of game. Soon, the slave owner personally walked up to the slaves. He smiled and said coldly, "Is there anyone willing to participate in the game just now? I can promise that if you successfully survive the game without dying, I will release you and restore your freedom." Upon hearing this, many slaves were instantly moved, experiencing a momentary surge of hope. Compared to being a slave, not even worthy of owning their own name or surname, with their descendants also doomed to slavery. Even if they were lucky enough to be bought one day, they would never be able to hold their heads high. Freedom. What a yearning name. Having lost their freedom, their selves, and everything, they couldn't even marry or have children. They couldn't even continue their own bloodline or procreate. Compared to these, what was so scary about death? All go. At this moment, a strong man leapt out. From the calluses on his palms, it was evident that he had once been a very powerful warrior. The slave owner nodded with satisfaction at the sight. He remembered this slave, a warrior captured from the Greek battlefield. Recently, Rome had been losing battles, and strong warrior captives like him were becoming rare. But in Rome, such powerful warriors, unless bought by someone to become private bodyguards, mostly faced only one outcome. Being chosen and bought, then becoming a gladiator, fighting against many slave gladiators to gain honor and wealth for their master. Until they bled their last drop and died in battle. Even if such slaves fell ill, unless their combat prowess was exceptionally outstanding, their master wouldn't spend money on their treatment, they would simply replace them with a new one. Strong warriors, while worth some money, were not worth much unless they were exceptionally talented and outstanding. Presenting some decent merchandise should satisfy the esteemed guests more. So the slave owner turned and loudly announced. Next, we have a strong Greek warrior who has voluntarily challenged this cruel game. Ladies and gentlemen, let us cheer for this courageous Greek. This is a genuine Greek, a formidable Greek soldier, captured from the Greek battlefield, possessing extremely high value. Honestly, I feel a little heartache. I hope he can survive to the end. As soon as the slave owner's words completely fell, instantly, cheers and excitement like a tidal wave erupted from above. A powerful warrior. And a Greek. Ha 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 tilde. This is exactly the kind of slave we want. If a slave dies too easily, without even a hint of resistance, how can that be interesting? They want to see a struggle between a strong man and a beast. And then, under the eager anticipation of the crowd, the strong Greek slowly walked out with a grim expression. After choosing his wooden weapon, a spear, he was transported by special tools and finally locked in a cage, which was then moved to the center of the arena, replacing the cage filled with venomous snakes. And this time, before the venomous snakes could descend from above, that Greek warrior had already actively pulled open the iron door, choosing to step outside, intending to fight the lions. Rather than waiting for the venomous snakes to descend and be scared witless, gaining a frightened debuff, it was better to be resolute and brave and walk out now. The Greek warrior was not confident that he could face countless venomous snakes and survive. So he chose to directly fight the lions, bravely fighting for a chance at freedom. However, Knight had sensed it the moment the Greek warrior stepped out and did not detect a powerful life force. The other party was just an ordinary person, not a Greek hero's. Even if his physique looked very strong, the outcome of facing a group of lions simultaneously was already foreseeable. Knight felt some pity, this was a battle destined to end in failure and blood. No, this was no longer a battle, but a desperate suicide journey for a trapped beast. There was no light ahead for him. It was too late. Knight, who had no weapon in hand, did not intend to save the man. Although he deeply sympathized with what was about to happen to him, he was not kind enough to risk his life for others. At least in reality, he was not allowed to act as recklessly as he did in the simulated universe world. As the lion's claws tore through the man's throat, the Greek warrior, unwilling to give up, gripped the lion's head, his eyes wide as he was bitten to death. Initially, there were roars, sounds of fear, and curses, but the moment his throat was bitten through, all sounds vanished. No, there was still one sound lingering. It was the faint spray of blood splattering in the air, so subtle that one might not notice it without listening carefully. But for those who witnessed the entire hunt, it was impossible not to pay attention. In fact, connecting the sight and sound created a chilling sensation. Immediately, from the stands, countless excited or cursing voices erupted. Before the Greek warrior even appeared, someone had set up a betting pool above, betting on how long the Greek warrior would survive. Yes, how long he would survive, not whether he would survive to the end. No one believed that anyone could pass the inhuman trials below, although they couldn't compare to the 12 labors in Greek mythology. They were all hellish trials that challenged the limits of human physiology. They believed that unless the legendary demigod Heracles himself descended, no one could walk out of here alive. And at this moment, someone yelled in extreme frustration, "I originally thought he would at least hide in the cage until the venomous snakes descended. That way, he could at least survive for 3 minutes. But he couldn't even wait a moment before going to his death. This idiot. He made me waste an Alice gold coin. Next round, you'll definitely make money next round, I believe you just had bad luck." The bookmaker responded cheerfully at this moment. He was never stingy with smiles for generous gentlemen. And with all walks of life amidst the myriad noises, the slave owner had already begun selecting the next candidate. He loudly asked, "Is there anyone else willing to undertake the trial?" But no one answered. Compared to their eagerness before. After witnessing another bloody death, even the brave ones recoiled. The tiny bit of courage that had just risen instantly dissipated. That was not a path to freedom, but a path to death. They knew from the start that this would be the outcome. But they always couldn't help but fantasize about miracles, about the possibility of a sudden burst of power at a critical moment, directly killing the lion and intimidating the pride. Thanks for watching.